to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in compliance with NJSA 10:4, the Open Public Meetings Act, notice of this special meeting of the Jackson Township Board of Adjustment has been published and posted in all appropriate locations.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Book,
Here.
Ms. Fritsch. Here. Mr. Hurley.
Here.
Ms. Camello. Here. Ms. Russell. Here. Ms. Bradley.
Here.
Mr. Costanzo.
Here.
Mr. Najarian.
Here. Okay, we got approval for resolution.
Yes. First is Resolution 2021-28 for Nicola / 534 Whitesville Road LLC, Block 2401, Lot 15, 534 Whitesville Road, granting approval of a variance to permit multiple principal uses with existing building. Eligible are Mr. Book, Ms. Fritsch, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Mr. Costanzo, Mr. Najarian.
Okay, I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Ms. Fritsch,
yes,
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello. Yes. Mr. Costanzo,
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
Resolution 2021-29, Rice, Block 13501, Lot 22, 848 Green Valley Road, granting approval of a variance to construct a single-family dwelling along with a pool and tennis court on an undersized lot. Eligible are Mr. Book, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Costanzo, Mr. Najarian.
I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello,
yes,
Ms. Russell,
yes,
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Costanzo,
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
Resolution 2021-32, KKV Investments LLC, Block 902, Lot 10, Jackson Mills Road, granting preliminary and final site plan approval to permit construction of a same-day veterinarian hospital and office. Eligible are Mr. Book, Ms. Fritsch, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Najarian.
I need a motion and a second on the subject.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Ms. Fritsch,
yes,
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello. Yes. Ms. Russell,
yes,
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
Resolution 2021-33, Frank, Block 7708, Lot 1, 25 Fordham Road, granting a variance to construct a fence. Eligible are Mr. Book, Ms. Fritsch, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
So moved to approve.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Ms. Fritsch,
yes,
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello,
yes,
Ms. Russell,
yes,
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
Resolution 2021-34, Sanuka, Block 10001, Lot 52, 440 Freehold Road, granting approval of a variance to construct a single-family dwelling on an undersized lot. Eligible are Mr. Book, Ms. Fritsch, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Najarian.
Need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Ms. Fritsch,
yes,
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello. Yes. Ms. Russell,
yes,
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
Resolution 2021-35, AS Pushkin Memorial Park, Block 11404, Lot 61, Cassville and Prineville Road, approving a variance for installation of memorial statues. Eligible are Mr. Book, Ms. Fritsch, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Mr. Costanzo, Mr. Najarian.
I need a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call. please.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Ms. Fritsch,
yes,
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello. Yes. Ms. Russell,
yes,
Mr. Costanzo,
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
Lastly is Resolution 2021-36, Giacobi, Block 6001, Lot 13, 15 Rhode Island Drive, granting a variance to construct a fence. Eligible are Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Costanzo, Mr. Najarian.
I need a motion and a second.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello,
Yes.
Ms. Russell,
yes,
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Costanzo,
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
That concludes the resolutions for this evening.
Did a great job.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're gonna do it again. Approval for minutes.
There are two sets from August 18th, 2021 and September 1st.
I need a motion on the second.
Are the same folks eligible for both
Yeah,
sets?
No, eligible for August 18th are Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Costanzo, and Mr. Najarian.
So Mr. For the August 18th.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello,
Yes.
Ms. Russell. Yes. Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Costanzo.
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
And eligible for September 1st, 2021 is Ms. Fritsch, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, Ms. Russell, Ms. Bradley, Mr. Costanzo, and Mr. Najarian.
Need a motion and a second.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Fritsch. Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello,
Yes.
Ms. Russell. Yes. Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Mr. Costanzo.
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes. Okay. Payment of vouchers. I have two in front of me. One for $150 and the other one was $250. Different thing. And the other is secretary. I need a motion and a second on the bills.
So moved, pay them both.
Get a motion and a second. Roll call, please, on the bills.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Ms. Fritsch. Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello,
Yes.
Ms. Russell. Yes. Mr. Costanzo.
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes. Okay, I got announcements. Any announcements?
Mr. Chairman, it appears, as far as I'm aware, and I defer also to Mr. Purpuro, that there are two announcements regarding to tonight's agenda. The first announcement is application number 2, Donald and Elena Pearson, variance number 3380, has been asked or is required to be carried to the October 20th, 2021 meeting.
That's correct. They had a problem posting their notice.
All right, so they're going to note, they're going to provide proper notice.
Yes,
Okay, so that matter can just be adjourned. They're going to have to notice properly. And the other matter, application number 5, Vlahos 643 Herman Road, preliminary and final site plan 831 with a use variance number 3350. They've been asked to carry to the November 17, 2021 meeting without the requirement of further notice, I presume.
that's correct.
So members of the public, I see no objection from the board. Anyone here for application number 5 as indicated, the Valajos 643 Herman Road application. That matter is being carried to the November 17, 2021 meeting without the requirement of further notice. The applicant has waived time through the date of that meeting. That's all the announcements I'm aware of, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I got anything for executive session?
No, sir.
Okay, and the next one is matters of discussion. That will be taken care of. No matters of discussion. Okay, so let's swear in the professionals.
Folks, if each of you would raise your right hand, do each of you solemnly swear or affirm that the information, questions, comments, or testimony you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? From Mr. Hill, can you introduce yourself, please?
Evan Hill, Board Engineer.
Ernie Peters, Board Planner.
Jeffrey Purpuro, zoning officer.
Frank Miskovich, Board Traffic Engineer.
Okay, so we're gonna hear the first application, all right? We're here for the Jackson Baptist Church.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Robert Shea appearing on behalf of the applicant Jackson Baptist Church. The application is before the, not a different Shea. The application is before the board tonight is actually stems from the filing of our preliminary and final site plan before the planning board, which is still pending, very frankly. The application was, we received reports from the professional staff. An issue arose, very frankly, regarding one of the accessory uses within inside the building itself. The purpose of the application pending before the board is to do a renovation on the existing Baptist church. It includes a multi-purpose room and a variety of other improvements. Question came up by the staff and was ultimately reviewed by Mr. Purpuro as to whether or not the proposed gymnasium that was part of the multipurpose room, whether or not that was a appropriate accessory use permitted under the codes. And we were given two options. First option, while the application was pending before the planning board, to either refile before the Board of Adjustment, which we didn't feel, very frankly, that would be the appropriate way to go, since we're confident that we can explain the situation to the board, or to seek an interpretation of Mr. Purpuro's determination, which again was dated May 7th of 2021, which we're here for today. And very simply, the letter we received from Mr. Purpuro indicated that that based upon his analysis, the applicant may either apply to the Board of Adjustment for variance approval or apply to the Board of Adjustment for interpretation of the determination. He indicated that the introduction of the gymnasium and associated men's and women's shower facilities were not incidental or accessory to the church use. And as a result of that, we're here seeking an interpretation of that. I have only one witness, that's Mr. Dave Roberts, who is the chairman of the building committee, who will explain, what the use is, what the purpose of it is, how it fits into the multi-purpose room, and very frankly, the rationale for having the gymnasium with the basketball court inside the facility to service the congregates children, and also give them an opportunity to participate in some athletic sports.
You can proceed.
Well,
Bring up-
excuse me, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I apologize, and maybe I'm jumping on you too. Before you call your witness, I'd just like to ask, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Mr. Peters, or Mr. Purpuro, if you can give just some general background as to the question before the board from a planning perspective.
Sure, I'll go first. The application was submitted through the planning board. And in the description of the proposed uses, there was a concern that if the planning board were to ask, is this a permitted use? But the board itself, the planning board, is not charged with making that interpretation. So if Jeff's unhappy with the description of the proposed uses, the interpretation of that correctly belongs here. So I'll take full blame for the reason that I made the Jackson Baptist Church spend $500 and bring Mr. Shea and Mr. Roberts out this evening. The concern is that if the question were to come up at the planning board's not the forum for determination of permitted uses. This board is. Quite frankly, I think we're going to hear some testimony. I think it should be fairly quick, the presentation, and I think we can probably move forward just as quickly. But the reason they're here is because if this question were asked at the planning board, I don't believe the planning board has jurisdiction to discuss or decide whether or not what's being proposed here tonight is a permitted use in the zone.
And to be fair, while I appreciate Mr. Peters' broad shoulders, and I want to also thank Mr. Shea, quite frankly, and his team as well. This was not just some uniform administrative action. We've had several conversations. We all agreed that the proper jurisdiction to interpret the question was here.
I agree with that. We had Mr. Gurdon and I exchanged many emails regarding this issue. I think it's safe. It's a safe path for everyone to make sure that the planning board has jurisdiction of all the uses that are before it. Again, we're prepared to probably move forward before the planning board because it's reached a point in time where it actually has gotten reviewed. And I also have a letter of absolution from the church that will be given to all attorneys and engineers involved in this project. So, but I have Mr. Peters here.
Knows I could use it.
Yeah. I have Mr. Roberts here to provide additional testimony.
So one last thing, Mr.
Sure.
Shea, as I jumped on Mr.
Steve.
Costanzo.
No, you hit my concerns. Question was answered.
Through the chair. Mr. Peters, if you could provide a little bit more context. The Baptist church is in an LC zone, right? All right. So within our code, is there a specific code reference that you can refer to that confirms or tells us what a church is and what the accessory uses are?
I'd be happy to, but I'd like to give Mr. Shea and Mr. Roberts an opportunity to present that information to us.
Okay.
And then if the board's unconvinced or requires additional discussion, I'd be happy to, but I don't necessarily want to start off by just reading definitions into the record. I'd like them, having understood that Jeff has a concern about the proposed uses, to give us their detailed explanation of what's going on.
All right, that's.
Any other questions from board members? Otherwise, you can proceed and bring your witness forward to be sworn in.
Thank you.
Mr. Yes, so we need to make sure, because this is being live streamed, we don't have virtual meetings, but folks do listen, so we need to speak clearly into the microphones. Mr. Roberts, if you kindly raise your right hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the information, questions, comments, or testimony you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Sorry. Back off the mic.
It
works. It's the same exact mic we use at church.
I understand, and to be fair to you, you bring a certain level of expertise to this discussion, but you're not you're testifying in your role with the church, correct?
That is correct. Even though I'm a licensed planner and have been practicing for 40 years, I'm not here as an expert. I'm here as the chair of the building committee to try to explain to the board the thought process in terms of why the church feels it needs this addition, some of the background. And if I might, Mr. Chairman, I simply brought one handout that I thought might help to provide a more concise background to the board, which is.
Excuse me, can you take the conversation outside?
And actually close that door for the echo. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. It's really
Tell me a
simply,
little bit about your credentials so I can approve them. Go ahead, continue.
well, it's all right. I'm not testifying as an expert. I'm just the chairman of the building committee tonight.
Just to be clear, Mr. Roberts is a planner of many, many years, but he's head of the building committee for the church. As well, testimony for the use.
And just a little, and in addition to that, Mr. Chairman, I would just indicate that my experience, having been a member of Jackson Baptist Church, is about 20 years. I've been a member since about 2000, 2001, when I used to live in Jackson. My family lived in Jackson from 1999 to 2004. And we found Jackson Baptist Church at the time was 1.9 miles away from our home. And I've been active in the church in many facets ever since, including,
Thank you for coming forward. Go ahead, continue.
Okay, if it pleases the chair, if I can just pass out, it's just simply the statement of operations that we submitted with our planning board application, which gives a full description of what the church is trying to do. And I think that might help speed things along.
Will you mark that A1?
Do you have the addendum as well? That's where most of the detail is. Okay, I'll just, Mr. Chairman, if you might, it might be redundant, but you'll have at least everything.
Let's mark it A1. It's
Sure. And I'll just start at this end, if that's okay. Sure. And I think there's 14 copies, should be enough to go all the way around. And I'll just give while that's being passed around, I'll just give you a quick sort of overview of it's really addendum the addendum that has the chronology. As Mr. Shea mentioned, we're in front of the planning board for what we call phase 2, which is the multipurpose room addition. The church started out back in the 1970s when the original building was built. When the congregation outgrew the building, right about in the early 2000s, it was approved actually by the planning board in 2006. We added what you might have noticed during that period of time is the sanctuary addition, which is where the worship center is. That's a worship room of about 400 seats, fixed theater seating. And that is the main sanctuary that replaced the old sanctuary in the original building, which was then converted into a sort of what we call a friendship hall. It's a room of about maybe 20 by 30 or so. That's the only other large room in the building. The rest of the original wing was converted into classrooms and offices for the pastors. So there's really currently what you see when you drive down Bennett's Mills Road. From the road, you see mostly the sanctuary, the new building, what we call phase 1. And behind that is the original rectangular building, which has the one larger sort of flex room and the classrooms and offices for the pastor and the original kitchen. The original kitchen was built with the original building in the 1970s. I believe it was finished in 1979. It's so the building is over 50 years old. We're still using that kitchen today. The kitchen is barely adequate. In addition to that, you'll notice on the addendum in terms of why we need the addition. In addition to the kitchen, we only have, when we have a large event, so for example, during the summer, we have Vacation Bible School, which is very common amongst houses of worship everywhere that you go. And it's a 1 week, every day program for children. Some of the activities have to take place in the sanctuary because there's no other room large enough for those kinds of activities. In addition, just to give you a couple of other examples, when we have the sanctuary is seats over 400, has over 400 seats in it. We've never really quite gotten to the point where we filled that room. There was a point in a time, probably around 2012, 2013, when we started having 2 services on a Sunday, an early service and a later service, so that there would be, it wouldn't be quite as tight in that room. So we had grown to that point. In fact, in 2013, we came to the planning board and got a site plan application approval to expand our parking lot. Church congregation has declined in numbers somewhat from that point. But what we found is when we brought in a new associate pastor whose main focus is children and families, our youth group grew quickly. So that's a program where our teenagers get together, they bring their friends, they meet on a Wednesday evening. Currently, when they have their free time, which is the period of time where they can play games, they can recreate. The only place they can go do that is the parking lot, because we have some basketball hoops out in the parking lot for any of the teenagers that want to shoot baskets or whatever. What they had been using was an annex. The property started out as just an older home with a garage in the back. The garage was converted to an annex. The annex is where our food pantry is, which is one of the most widely used food pantries in the county. I think our congregation is very unique in that it does not rely on government subsidies for the food pantry. Everything's supported by faith donations by the congregation, and they operated out of that annex. The teenagers were using the attic of that annex. They've outgrown it. So there really is no place for them to go to recreate indoors except that one room that we talked about before, Friendship Hall. And it's going on at the same time as the choir is trying to rehearse in the sanctuary because there's no place else for the choir to rehearse. So that's just to give you an idea. And also when we have a church dinner, for example, which is very common from a social ministry of the church, we can't fit everybody in that fellowship hall. So we end up having to put tables in the hallway. Another example is when the men's has their a breakfast every quarter. A number of the men get together. They get to the church early. They make breakfast. They bring friends. And it's a men's ministry. They have to serve the food out in the hallway in front of the sanctuary because they just barely fit the men in the Friendship Hall. So that's just to give you an idea of some of what we've been sort of living with the idea that this multi-purpose room would be large enough so that the entire church family can gather in one room. The kitchen would be next to that room and be able to serve that room. And then the old kitchen would be converted into either another office or another classroom. The other aspect of this is when we were in front of the planning board in 2006, the footprint for this multi-purpose room addition, which was called Phase 2, was on the site plan and was approved. The site plan was designed in terms of its stormwater management, in terms of its, we have on-site wastewater because we can't connect into the sewer line in Bennett Mills Road because it's a forced main. We found that out as we started planning this multi-purpose room addition. So that septic field was designed in anticipation of the multi-purpose room, and the purpose of Phase 2 was always going to be a multi-purpose room. The overall program for the facility would be what used to be the church is now the education wing. The sanctuary is the worship portion. The multipurpose room would be for the socialization of the congregation and also to facilitate many of the ministries that we have for men, women, youth, and children.
So,
So-
so I appreciate, on behalf of the board, appreciate the background. And Mr. Shea, maybe though, just to kind of focus the specific question before the board, I'm going to probably try to anticipate your question to Mr. Peters. I'm reading now from Mr. Peters' review letter that was directed to the planning board on April 27th, fourth page. This is the focus of why this is here. The applicant is proposing in addition to the church, as Mr. Roberts indicated, I don't think anyone takes any exception. There was always a perception and knowledge that a phase 2 would occur. This is the point I want the board to focus on, and I'm sure Mr. Shea does as well. The uses within the addition include a gymnasium, showers, and restrooms for men and women, a stage, a kitchen, and a pantry. The proposed use or uses of the addition should be discussed to determine if those uses are part of the principal use and are permitted in the LC zone. The applicant shall submit a list of proposed activities, which they've done, and Mr. Roberts has described, and anticipated participants, a timetable related to hours of operation and the like. I'm sort of paraphrasing at this point. And then Mr. Peters raised the question, the applicant may be required to appear before the zoning board for D1 use variance, and that's because the zoning code, as I understand it, and if anyone disagrees with me, let's make sure the record is clear, does not specifically articulate a multi-purpose room as accessory to a church. It doesn't define the pantry, a gymnasium, and all these separate sort of uses as by right accessory. And that raised the question. So Mr. Roberts, let's talk more broadly. Mr. Shea endeavored through his client to prepare a statement of operations and the addendum as he's described it. And Mr. Purpuro doing his job after review of the statement of operations, which Mr. Roberts has now articulated, found that as it pertains to the statement of operations, the introduction of the gymnasium and associated shower facilities and the like are not incidental or accessory to the church use. That's the question. They are now and when we say challenge, I'm using the word challenge like a lawyer uses. It's not, it's not antagonistic or the like. We're going through the process, but the applicant is challenging that interpretation through testimony, arguing that the uses to which this multi-purpose building structure are to be utilized are in fact by definition, if I may use that word, by the way in which he's articulating them, are in fact ancillary and incidental to the overall church use. Is that a decent summary?
I think just to refine it even further, is
Okay,
that
thank you.
when we submitted the statement of operations to Mr. Purpuro, I think there was a set of plans and also a statement of operations indicating what the functions, what some of the uses were in a multi-purpose room. It was not so much the multi-purpose room, it was the introduction of this gymnasium as to whether or not that use in and of itself was a appropriate incidental or accessory use. And that's, I think Mr. Roberts was giving a background to the board just to indicate what has been taking place on the site with the basketball courts on the outside and what the intention is of the applicant as it relates to the gymnasium. I think he's probably going to be getting to that in about 2 seconds.
So just to, if I may, just some pointed questions. For instance, there's no anticipation or request of the applicant to use the gymnasium space or to rent that out to outside folks.
It's really just an internalization of what's happening outside so that it can happen year round. Right now, our youth have no place to go in the wintertime or in inclement weather. And just for a quick explanation of the shower aspect, I have to take personal, that's kind of my baby, if I can use that term. And the reason for that is during Sandy, when we were out of power for 2 weeks, I personally know, because I'm on a well, that I had to drive. I live in Berkeley Township now. I had to drive from Bayville to Pinewell to take a shower at Central Regional High School because my water pump was done with the power. Our neighbors around our church on Bennett Mills Road are all on wells. During Sandy, because when we built the Phase 1 sanctuary, we were required to tie into the township water supply. We had township water. Our pastor in our parsonage was providing water to the neighbors so they could flush their toilets, they could cook or whatever, because their pumps were out as well. So we felt there, we raised through private donations of giving of our congregants about $1.2 million towards the cost of this multipurpose room addition. And a good part of that, the heart of that giving was in the fact that they wanted this building to be a resource to the community. And that's why the showers are being introduced, because we are having, the intent is to have backup power. We have a food pantry, we'll have a kitchen. With the showers, we would be able to provide sanctuary to whomever needed it. In fact, our building committee outreach to the Jackson Township EMS staff to find out during Sandy, was there a need for this kind of a sanctuary? And we found out that while Liberty and Memorial were being used as shelters temporarily during that time frame when there was no power, there was a problem with folks with special needs needing to be separated from the general population. And this would have been sort of an ideal solution to that if it existed at that time. So that's what the heart of the congregation is. And that's why the showers are being proposed. We don't really anticipate that anyone's going to take a shower after they play a couple of games of basketball. They'll probably go home and do that. And the septic system is not intended for regular uses of the showers, as you can imagine. So they're basically there mainly in the case of an emergency. They might get used from time to time, but my sense is that for the general use of our church family and their friends and whoever come and use that facility, they're not going to be showering there. That's really not the purpose of the shower. So I just wanted to make that clear. The fact that the showers were being provided in combination with the gym floor and the basketball hoops has been, and I can understand that, trust me, being the township planner in Toms River, I understand you have to be careful about what you allow and what you don't allow. But that was the thought process. So I can just relay that to the board members as to why the showers were even proposed. We could certainly do without the showers, but the reason for the showers was really to be prepared in case we ever have another situation like we had in Sandy when we were out without a power for a prolonged period of time, because we know our neighbors don't have, they have wells. That's pretty much, I just wanted to make that clear.
Good. Ernie, you have anything to add?
Not at this point. If the board members have any questions or any issues they'd like to go over, I thought it was important that there was a good solid trail that got us from the church to each of the uses that are being proposed here, so that they could be wrapped up and considered as what we would normally refer to as a church. And I think Mr. Book was starting to ask him before what the land use definition in town of a church is. It's a building or a group of buildings, including customary accessory buildings designed or intended for worship on a permanent or continuous basis. And I suspect Mr. Roberts perhaps may have read that, because I think he's cleared that hurdle, at least from my perspective, in terms of the use of the property. But I'm here to answer any questions the board members may have regarding our land use ordinance and definitions.
James has one.
I have a question, I guess of Mr. Peters or Mr. Purporo. I'm reading statement of operations, which is A1. It speaks to additional classroom space. Now, additional classroom space to me seems to indicate that there are classrooms. Are classrooms permitted in the ordinance itself relative to houses of worship, things of that nature? Because if they are, and they already exist, and if classrooms are, then the decision that I would have to make as a member is a gymnasium really accessory to an educational type of operation, which classrooms would be. And it would seem like it would indicate that it is. So I'm just curious as to what is the status of the classrooms. Obviously, they're there. Obviously, they've been in operation. So either at one time when this was created, they were permitted, or there was a variance if they're not permitted. Does anyone know the answer?
I think, I don't know if the applicant would want to respond to that query before the board's professionals or staff does.
The only thing I would say is I know that the zone has changed since we got the phase one addition approved. It was a residential zone before. Churches were a conditional use in a residential zone. Classrooms are part of Sunday school. For example, during the church service, we have all the children leave during the sermon. They go through their own place where they have their own program. We're hoping post-COVID to get back to where we had divided before the church service, an hour before the actual worship service, there would be divided classrooms for different age groups. We call it JBC Kids. It's a biblical education for children that happens on Sundays, but it is certainly nothing beyond that. And the actual what I didn't get a chance to mention in the new building is because it's a prefab building with a mezzanine, there's a multi-purpose room in the mezzanine that would basically be a long room that could be divided into 3 sections. So it could be used if we expand to the point where we need additional classrooms for the Christian education, or we need a rehearsal room for the choir, or we need a recreation space for the teenagers so that the teen leaders can see both what's going on in that room and down below what's going on the floor. That's what all of the thought that was in behind the building, if that helps.
So, Mr. Roberts, this isn't a full-time educational classroom that would be recognized by the Department of Education per se.
No, and the church has no intention of operating any kind of a full-time school on the property.
Thank you.
So having said all of that, it is, whatever the classroom space is, it's for education. It may be religious education, but it's education, correct?
Or
It's education.
or crafts or any other activities that need small rooms.
Right, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Through the chair? Yes. Mr. Peters, if you would, so you gave us the definition of the permitted use in the LC zone for the church. And in the definition, as I heard you read it, it didn't say anything about gymnasiums. It didn't say anything about classrooms. It didn't say anything about men and women's showers. I think that's a given. So then I know there's a section in the ordinance, and if you would refer to it and read it to us, I would like to know what the accessory uses are in this zone and how it applies to this particular intended use. If my recollection is correct, and I took a look, but my version may be older, an accessory use for church has to be clearly incidental. I think that's the modifier that I saw in the ordinance. And then I have to question myself, are these intended other uses? Are they clearly incidental? And how do we wrestle with that issue?
Right. And when you look at the definition of a church, it includes customary accessory buildings. So as opposed to just looking what's accessory in the LC zone, I think you need to look at what's customarily accessory in a church. And that's where the land use part gets a little more tricky. My upbringing included St. Al's or St. Veronica's, and I always perceived that a church had places where you could go on Saturday or Sunday for educational study, group functions, bingo, any number of things. And so the advancement of the house of worship would have included a secondary building, not unlike what they referred to as phase 2, which apparently has been on the books for more than 15 years and has been part of their program going back into the previous century. So from my planning perspective, or my own personal review of what customarily accessory would be, I believe these buildings are.
Well, here's the issue, or one of the issues. What you believe to be customary and what I may believe to be customary and others believe to be customary may be worlds apart. Perhaps the next thing that that wants to be put in there is perhaps some major convention center, or perhaps some an internal shopping center where all kinds of uses and benefits can be accorded to their membership. But none of that is recorded were written into the statute or into accessory uses. We have no definition of what customary would be in the milieu of what is used by churches and religious institutions. And then I have an additional question for you, Mr. Peters. Since it's regards religion, I mean, we've been beat over the head with the Religious Land Use Institutionalized Practices Act. And so if this is a religious exercise, do we not also have to take into consideration whether or not this somehow infringes upon their religious exercise? And do we then have to interpret the ordinance in light of our LUPA? So I'm betwixt and between in terms of how we wrestle with interpreting it the way perhaps it's proposed, or do we really need to hear it? So those are some of the questions I'm wrestling with, and I would appreciate any guidance you could give us to navigate us through that.
The one I can't give you any help on is RLUIPA.
Okay.
I'm going to run away from that like I'm on fire in a tornado, because it's simply not my area of expertise. But understanding that that's something that the municipality has to deal with, as all municipalities do. It is the board's purview to interpret the ordinance, which is the reason we brought the applicant here. The conversation that you folks are having this evening, planning board can't have. So jurisdictionally, again, that's the reason you guys get the big bucks, is to come in and say, this is how land use has progressed in Jackson Township over your years or decades of service in the municipality. This is what the land use ordinance says, understanding that land use ordinances are fluid, and the printed word says this. So you're required to interpret not only what's written, but with deference to the presentation that an applicant may make regarding that.
So if I may just jump in on that. So I'm going to utilize or hold on to the term with deference to the presentation the applicant made. So with deference to the presentation the applicant made, the applicant's argument, in my opinion, understanding the rubric of RLUIPA, right? Because their argument is, as I heard it at least, that incidental and customary to their practice, to their beliefs, was the following narrow uses of this multi-purpose building. Gymnasium use for current congregants, the pantry to give out to those less fortunate, the opportunity for showers, potentially for those who are utilizing the gym, but certainly again for community outreach in case of emergency. Same thing with the classroom space. The classroom space has no, that's a term of art, as what I heard the testimony. It's quite frankly, it could be termed additional multi-purpose space, sometimes used for Bible study, sometimes used for classroom space, sometimes, and I see yes, shaking the applicant's witness shaking his head, yes, agreeing with these comments. So the purpose here, and you're right, Mr. Book, in my opinion at least, the testimony and the application in fact of what as to what the applicant proposes in this multi-purpose structure, this phase 2, must be viewed in light of the RLUIPA and the religious practice as articulated by the applicant. What the board therefore can do, based on testimony, is circumscribe and narrow, and again, I see a yes to that, shaking his head. I want the record to show that. The board can circumscribe and narrow those particular uses so this creeping does not occur, so that if from an enforcement perspective, if all of a sudden you see this multi-purpose building being utilized once a week for a flea market or a bazaar or something, whether it's for fundraising for the church or not, quite frankly, whether it's rented out to a third party or not, that would be an expansion beyond what was incidental and customary to the religious practice and the use, and certainly not perceived as incidental or customary by the terms of the ordinance. Mr. Roberts, do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. And if I could add, Mr. Gurney, quickly to that, in our faith, in our particular congregation, we do not fundraise. If we do not fundraise, anything that we do is sponsored through stewardship of our congregation. That's a private matter between them and God. And it's by faith, and that's how we raise the money so far that we've raised, and we have no intention of using the building for fundraising.
So for fear of asking a silly question directly, so you would never perceive a bingo as an example?
That is correct.
Okay.
If I may follow up a little bit?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Carl.
I'm sorry. Mr. Gardner, what you just laid upon the record could be very compelling, I think, and the applicant making that argument, if we were here to consider an application for a variance. The concern I have is that this isn't an application for a variance, it's an application for an interpretation. And if I understand some of the earlier directions and instructions that we received and learned from you and other applications on an interpretation has a fairly significant impact in that it can be relied upon, and it becomes a binding, so to speak, definition that then attaches to the language in the ordinance. And since there's so much vagary in terms of what the applicant's going to do and not do, can that interpretation then be specifically applied to other religious applicants in a clear and concise manner without us getting into deeper water? So from an interpretation standpoint, I have concerns. From a variance standpoint, it would be a different approach. So I'm just concerned about the implications of an interpretation. And if I misunderstood the prior lessons that you have bestowed upon us with interpretations.
No, you haven't. And that's to use the vernacular, that's a little bit where the rub is, right? So the question is, the issue would be how circumscribed can you develop the memorialization should you approve the interpretation so that you don't leave it to an administrative official to hear testimony, unsworn testimony from a new applicant to say, well, I'm doing the same thing as this church. I can't disagree with. The question is, do you hear enough? And can someone, and this would really be for Mr. Shea, to try to articulate this as well. Is the board sufficiently comfortable to interpret the ordinance, to interpret the language that incidental and customary to the worship, to the specific articulation from this applicant?
James?
Yeah, I just had one concern about RLUIPA. I want to make sure that RLUIPA at this stage of this application, I don't think it applies at all. Number one, the basis under RLUIPA is not to impose any unreasonable conditions on the exercise of religion, things of that nature. We are not making any decision here tonight relative to the use of the property. We're just determining whether or not it's a permitted use or it's not a permitted use. In either way, the applicant still has the opportunity to either go to the planning board if it's a permitted use, or the zoning board of adjustment if we determine it's not a permitted use. So I wouldn't even consider a loop at this point. It would be, I think it would be irrelevant to the discussion. I think Mr. Book is correct. It's a matter of whether or not the use is to be determined, not as a principal use, but as an accessory use, and how we define it if the board decides that the use is an accessory, it's a permitted accessory use. So I just don't want to talk about RLUIPA, quite frankly, because I just think it's irrelevant.
Again, just so we zero in on the issues, the issue that's before the board is really relative, not to so much the pantry and a multi-purpose room, because that's already been vetted out. The only issue that we're here before the board is seeking a determination as to whether or not the use of the multi-purpose room in its other capacities as a gymnasium, again, with the ladies' room and a men's room as described by Mr. Roberts, is an accessory use or permitted accessories under your ordinance. And again, for the reasons set forth by Mr. Roberts and the way in which the sanctuary works and the church operates with respect to the current classroom facilities, I think Mr. Hurley had indicated whether or not this could be considered as part of educational. To me, it's physical education to a certain degree. We certainly went through all that in the various high schools that we've been through. So conceivably, it could be a theme to be a physical education for the congregants' children who participate in these activities. And my understanding that it's mostly the congregants' children that participate in the basketball league. Is that correct?
It's really just recreate. It's just things for the youth to do when they have their free time. Right now, they're playing basketball out in the parking lot. They can't do that in the wintertime. We had approved a 9,300 square foot footprint. That's what all of the site improvements were based on. Within that 9,300 square feet, there's a 70 by 100-foot box. One of the first things we wanted to find out is, could we fit a full gymnasium or I should say a full basketball court? There's also a potential for volleyball and other things. It's whatever that space would be used for physical activities. As it turned out, we could fit a full basketball court in there. So that's the way the architect designed it. But when we first had the footprint laid out, we weren't quite sure how we were going to lay it out. That's why the footprint was approved, but we had to go back to the planning board with the full architectural plans. We were able to fit the full basketball court in there. So we added that as an amenity to our youth and whoever else may want to use it in terms of the congregation. That's the entire reason why it's there.
We have any other questions from the board for this witness? Yes, James.
Just one more question. The use of the gymnasium, if it is determined that it is a permitted accessory use, is going to be restricted to the church's congregants and their family. Is that correct?
And potentially their guests too. I mean, a lot of the youth bring friends. That's actually why the youth program has grown. And we feel it's a ministry to the youth. It gives them a teaching it teaches them about the Bible, as well as give them time to have active time together. So a lot of the families that have youth that go to our church bring their friends. So, but yes, that's generally what it's for.
It would be sponsored by the church.
Exactly.
You can have other churches come and play basketball with your people?
That would be great if that would ever happen, but I don't know. Right now, we don't even have a team. We have boys and girls that come on Wednesdays. They shoot baskets at a hoop that's in the parking lot. So yeah, whether that would happen someday is possible, I guess, but it's not reason why we're doing the multi-purpose room.
Okay, so where are we, James? Anything else? Paul?
I'm good right now. For the moment.
Ernie? Anything?
So, Mr. Chairman, although you do not have to, the board is generally open the matter to the public, even interpretations in the public for any comment or questions.
Okay. I'd like to open up the public. If they have any issues, positive, negative, please come forward. I want to close the public session on this. So it's left to us.
Well, Mr. Shea may wish this.
You want to do a closing?
Just again, very briefly, I think you heard from Mr. Roberts as to the rationale for it. We're here for a very, very limited reason, and that's the request for the permission for permitted accessory use involving a gymnasium and the men's and ladies' room. That's really the sum and substance of the reason why we're here before the board. Seeking interpretation will allow us to proceed with the application before the planning board, which I'm sure will be vetted out at the planning board as to any questions that they may have regarding the project.
All right, thank you. It's left to us, board. We have to make a decision. That's why I was asking for
Mr.
some kind of
Chairman,
guidance.
Mr. Chairman, I'll weigh in. I read Mr. Purporo's May 7, 2021 letter I completely understand and agree with the decision that he made, that there was serious questions in terms of whether or not a gymnasium and an associated men's and women's shower should be deemed a permitted accessory use. It is not that I object on its face to what Mr. Roberts said they're going to use it for, and his attempt to circumscribe and limit what it is in an effort to help us conclude that it should fall within in the interpretation. I understand. My problem is I can't get across the threshold of changing our ordinance by saying that this use is contemplated in our ordinance. I don't believe it is clearly incidental. I don't want to expand the definition that way in our ordinance. Again, I understand what you want to do, but I don't believe it should be done by way of interpretation. Interpretation, in my mind, is something that should be considered carefully. We shouldn't be looking to broaden or expand the ordinance. I believe our review of those ordinance should be to a higher standard to protect the public. I believe if there's conflict, it must be resolved to a higher standard, and it's not for us to rewrite the ordinance. So I don't believe it's clearly incidental. I don't believe it is stated clearly enough to be deemed a permitted and incidental use, although I am receptive to that argument in the form of a variance, but we're not here tonight for a variance. So I am disinclined to interpret it as a permitted accessory use.
I agree with Mr. Book to a certain extent, and that relates to the specificity of uses, and we have to be very careful that we don't grant variances for uses which are not consistent with the governing body's intent in adopting the legislation that's in place. So I did look at the section in question. It's section 244-55. It's the LC limited commercial zone. And it does talk about permitted types of uses. It is not, admittedly, gymnasiums and showers are not specifically stated as accessory uses. But I don't think you can always specifically state what a particular accessory use should exist. That's why they put provisions in here that say that uses that are similar, that are the use that the language that's used in this specific section speaks to other customary accessory uses in buildings. And it says customary for that reason, because it is not anticipated that the specific type of accessory use is to be included or intended to be included this way. But I did look at the ordinance, and I'm looking at those uses which are principal permitted uses. And one of which, some of which are daycare center, preschools. I understand preschools being younger children. Churches and places of worship are included. Churches and places of worship, to me, regardless of what the religion is, always speaks in terms of education, religious education, but education. The A1 that we have placed in evidence indicates that there have been prior classrooms active within the building and within the operation, because it asks for additional classroom spaces, which to me means there must be classrooms. So if there are classrooms, it must have been permitted at one point, either as a principal use or as an accessory use, but permitted either way. And the gymnasium, to me, is a recreational aspect of a church or preschool or daycare centers where they have outside activities, as been testified here too, that indicate they already have these activities outside, just not inside, and they want to bring them inside. I think so long as the the use that is contemplated here to avoid, and Mr. Book's comments are very well taken, to avoid any ability to extend beyond that, so long as and if the applicant agrees, so long as the use of the gymnasium and the showers are sponsored by the applicant religion itself, which means that it would be used by congregants, families, their friends and guests for whatever purposes in that regard. And is not being brought, just open to the public so someone can come in and use the gym. If it's so long as it's related to the religion itself, or the applicant being the church, then my position would be that the way the ordinance is structured and adding the concept of that uses, other accessory uses that are complementary to the principal use. I think a gymnasium is a complementary use to an educational use, which is a part of this religion. And based on that, I would determine, and of course, I'm really quite not sure if this was an application under 70A or 70B, A being an appeal of Mr. Proporal's decision or B being an interpretation. In either event, it requires an interpretation. And I would interpret the ordinance when it relates to churches and places of worship, that it includes a religious educational aspect, which part of that religious educational aspect includes a recreational aspect, which in this case, I can determine for myself that a gymnasium and the showers would be permitted. I know there was testimony that the showers would not necessarily be attended to the gymnasium, but for emergency purposes, things of that nature. But if we have a lot of kids running around in the gymnasium, I'd love to hear them take a shower. So I would hold that under those conditions, that an interpretation would be that the gymnasium and showers are related to the religious educational aspect of this applicant. And so long as the activities are sponsored by the applicant church, I would be satisfied in determining that the gymnasium and the showers would be permitted accessory uses.
Beautiful, thank you. So Ernie, why don't you jump in, give some guidance?
I wanted to make sure that the board was following sort of the correct procedure for what we're doing. And after hearing Mr. Book and Mr. Hurley's comments, while I hate as a planner to bring out Cox, the New Jersey Zoning and Land Use Administration book, I've come across this in the past. And in chapter 38 of that guide entitled Accessory Structures, it indicates that under the nature of accessory uses and structures, that merely because a particular structure or use is not specifically mentioned in the zoning ordinance does not necessarily mean that it is prohibited and that a variance is required. It goes on to say that an accessory use is usually defined as one which is incidental and subordinate to the main use and is customarily so. So then in theory, you'd make, I guess, determinations that is the use incidental and is it customary? So I just wanted to bring that forward to the board members so that they sort of had a better avenue for making the determination.
Thank you, Ernie. So it's up to us. I need a motion and a second based on an interpretation.
I'd make a motion that this board interpret the ordinance, which was cited, which was section 244. Somebody help me out here. I just put it away. 55. LC limit commercial zone. Subsection A6D, which is for churches and places of worship, that the use of classrooms and gyms and showers that are specifically related to the applicant's beliefs or for educational purpose. Let me put it that way. I find that the gym and the showers would be related to a recreational, educational aspect of the religion, which would relate to the principal permitted use of churches and places of worship. And therefore, I would find that the use that is proposed is permitted. That would be my motion.
They got a motion, I need a second. Second. I got a motion and a second, roll call, please.
Wait, hang on 1 second. You're not eligible. Sorry. Keeping me awake.
All right.
So let me just do the roll call.
Discussion on the motion. By the board?
Yes, sir, Mr. Hurley. Let me just articulate this, so just to make sure everyone's square with so many new members. Mr. Najarian, Mr. Costanzo, Mr. Book, Ms. Fritsch, Mr. Hurley, Ms. Camello, and Ms. Russell. Is that 7? Those are the folks eligible to vote. You can, so Ms. Bradley, you can participate, you can articulate, you can ask questions, but eligibility purposes for the vote, so you can't second. But
Looking for a second.
do you want questions on the motion for, as the proponent of the motion? You want to ask for questions on the motion?
Well, discussion on the motion, if there's discussion that is warranted by the members.
And just
Either
further,
for or against, anything can change on that.
just further commentary, thank you, is under 244-55 B6, where the term clearly incidental is used to define accessory uses related to churches. I do not see that that is clearly incidental. I think that we are twisting ourselves in a knot almost in trying to fit the definition in, and I think that is stretching it a little bit too far. I'm concerned that the definition now that would now apply to all religious institutions, and all religious institutions are not governed by those same vague terms. Each has their own incidental and accessory uses, and some of those terms may apply, some of those practices may apply, and some may not. So I'm concerned about imparting a definition by virtue of this interpretation that doesn't adequately comply with the ordinance. And I believe by putting in such a definition, we'll be bound by it. And I don't think it's justified for the purpose of an interpretation. And so I think the proper methodology would be to come back and seek the variance. So that is my concern.
Would it be different because they don't see that in funding from the state or community school? And yeah, and funding or benefits as far as running the school, it's just for that.
The funding is almost irrelevant. That's one small aspect, but not the key. The key is how we are trying to define what the use of that building is going to be. And try as we might to say, okay, it's going to be limited to the congregation or to religious use. Well, if there's another Baptist church someplace else in town or someplace else, does this Baptist church have the right to come to this Baptist church because they're part of the same Baptist umbrella to use it, to use the showers, to use the gym, which now increases and goes beyond the intent as expressed by the applicant. We can't enforce that. We can't control it. So when we get to definitions where we're talking about similar religious institutions or similar religious practice, I don't know what that means. I don't know how you control that. I don't know how you rein that in. And I'm concerned that by providing such a definition, you're really opening a Pandora's box by virtue of the definition we're now going to impose. So, so that gives me pause. And you can't, I don't see how you can apply that definition that we'll now have. How do you apply that to a Protestant congregation, or a Methodist? How do you apply it to the Orthodox? How do you apply it to the Reformed? How do you apply it to the various different religious institutions? And there's a lot of them in our area. So I get very concerned that one definition, maybe as we're trying to construct here today, will work for the Baptist. Well, maybe that definition doesn't work so well for another religious institution. And so now we have an unequal application. One definition doesn't fit the other. And I think we end up getting ourselves into more trouble than it's worth in terms of now fixing a definition on an ordinance. So I'm not convinced that it should be an interpretation. They can come back and they can ask for a variance. And I think the approach would be entirely different in terms of how we would be receptive, or at least how I would be receptive to it. But I don't like doing it by interpretation. Don't like it at all. So the funding is really a very, very minor, almost a non-issue. I hope that answers your question. I tried. Okay.
So James, we have a motion still, or still have a motion?
Yes.
Okay, so I need a second on his motion. We can move forward.
I'll second the motion.
We got a second motion and a second roll call, please.
Mr. Book,
No.
Ms. Fritsch,
No.
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Camello,
Yes.
Ms. Russell? No. Ms. Costanzo?
Yes.
Mr. Najarian?
Yes.
4-3.
Thank you very much.
So the motion carries. Did I count wrong? Yes.
So enjoy your church.
Take care.
Okay, who's next up? Let's see. All right, Donna. Zupa. Looking for a time extension for a minor subdivision. Who's going to be,
Doing the speaking? Yes, I think.
Good evening. Ian Borden, PBS. The next item on the agenda is a minor subdivision for the Zupa family.
So, Mr. Board, thank you for raising your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the information, questions, comments, or testimony about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Briefly, can you just lay your credentials on the table? And although you've appeared numerous times before, the board,
Certainly.
relate those credentials in this particular circumstances to the specific request for the time.
I understand.
Thank you.
and tell me what your hat you're wearing here today. Is it
I
gonna be
understand.
Planning?
Planning. Planner.
I thought it was going to be an engineer.
No.
No. Tomorrow. Ian Borden, President of Professional Design Services, graduate of Rutgers University in 1982, licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. Been employed in the engineering planning field since 1983.
All right, we accept your
Thank you.
credentials. Thank you.
But through the chairman, and this will help focus again a little bit, as a planner, you're involved oftentimes in assisting and filing plats and the like,
That's correct.
and you're aware of at least certain regulations dealing with time extensions.
Yes,
So you're here to assist as a planner, the applicants for this.
I
extension.
am. This particular subdivision was represented by Mr. Shea, Ray Shea. In 2013, it was approved. Obviously, Mr. Shea is retired and passed away. I was asked, it turns out, I'm getting old because I told Mr. Zupa I didn't have any familiarity with the project. And I had my office email me the resolution while I was waiting, and it turns out I did the testimony. So, but this is an extension request for a subdivision, a minor subdivision. It actually was not a subdivision that created a new lot. It's lot 65 and 66 on Sunset Drive. The subdivision merely shifted a lot line by 10 feet. And the map was never filed for reasons I do not understand. And Mr. Zupa is building a home for his daughter on the second lot, and obtaining the building permit for that lot was discovered by Mr. Purpuro that the map was not filed. So we are seeking simply an extension of the 2013 approval to allow us sufficient time to obtain the signatures and file the plat.
But is there a condition precedent? What's the board's, can you just place on the record, what's the board's authority at this point, given the date of the approval, to grant a time extension versus you having?
I understand. Well, we had in 2013, when this project was approved, obviously a minor subdivision has a 6-month time period, approval period. There was at that time the Permit Extension Act that was signed by Governor Christie, and then that remained in effect until we have an extension that's in effect as actually right now under the Governor Murphy's executive order for COVID. In March of 2020, he signed an executive order extending all approvals until 6 months after the executive order was rescinded. The executive order was rescinded on June 4th of 2021. So in my opinion, this approval is still valid until December 4th of 2021. In the interest of ensuring that we can obtain the signatures and file the map, I would ask for an extension. This board is, a land use board is legally allowed to give a 1-year extension of a minor subdivision. So I would ask for that extension.
Well, but I think by articulation, the jurisdiction at best would be only till December 4th, 2021, right?
Well, we don't need any extension, in my opinion, for that date, because that date's already given by the executive order. But if you have a different opinion, we'll take that date. But
Ernie?
The short answer is sorry. I'm not familiar with the legislation. I do the same thing you do, which is to look it up. They didn't submit that with the application. And under the land use law, I'm not sure that minor subdivisions get the same time extension timeframes that major subdivisions do. So I'm not sure that, listen, if there was a mistake, that's fine. But
I just want to.
I'm not aware that there's a minor subdivision 1-year time extension in the land use law.
That's what it is.
There is a time extension provision. It's a period to be determined both by the applicant and the board. Not unlike when preliminary subdivisions or site plans, you get 2 years and 3 years. You get 3 years for preliminary, and you can ask for 2 1-year extensions. And then for final, you get 2 years and you get 3 1-year extensions. I'm not sure that is the same thing for minor subdivisions. I think the applicant comes in, says, here's the reason I didn't do it. Here's why I think it should be done. And here's the time frame within which I'm supposed to do it. So.
James, you have a.
I just have a question of the attorney, because my understanding is that with minor subdivision, it has to be recorded within 190 days or it's deemed void. Now, the board can extend up to a year, not exceeding a year from the date of the approval, but the statute specifically says what those provisions have to be met, what provisions have to be met in order to be entitled to the extension. And recording of the subdivision, either by deed or by plat, was not impacted by COVID, was not impacted by the governor's orders at all. Recording was available, and that could have been done. So I just don't think we have the authority to do so. So they may have to come in for, just a renewal on the site plan.
With all respect, I'd like to address that, Sean, because that's just incorrect.
So I did look through our files, and since the resolution was published back in 2013 and memorialized, there has been no attempt for resolution compliance to be made either. So there are review comments outstanding from both, at that time, the Dewberry Engineers Review Letter, the Remington and Vernick Review Letter, and also the conditions of the resolution that just have not been satisfied. So there is no plat ready to be filed at this point regardless.
So the argument would be potentially, so the board doesn't have to get into the morass, I'm sorry, of trying to articulate what COVID impacted and didn't impact it. Because right now, there's a lot of lawyers making a lot of money trying to figure out exactly what was and was not impacted. I think the best way to approach this respectfully, and we're trying to, hopefully you accede to this, is I think the board could take notice of the argument that through the permit extensions, that the end date for resolution compliance and filing the plat be December 4th, 2021.
That's fine.
Hard and fast date respectfully that avoids the jurisdictional question. Not to- it's a memorialization. You always face the risk that somebody could appeal, but I think that's the better, more narrow way to approach it.
I understand.
That's right.
And if Mr. Gertner or Mr. Peters or Mr. Hill, would you just explain for me, and I guess to the rest of the board, the implications of that being refused, of it being?
Well, if you were to vote no, the applicant would have to then basically just simply reapply. Particularly in the circumstance that resolution compliance hasn't been completed.
So it'd be the expense and the time of doing a whole new application for the applicant. All right, okay, thank you.
The answer is no.
I would agree with that.
That your planner testified, you're satisfied with his testimony? And the comments are, Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
gonna open it up to the public. Anybody want to speak on this? Positive, negative? Nobody coming forward. I'm gonna close public session. Anything you want to add?
No.
Okay, so it's up to us. We're gonna make a motion here and a second on this extension.
Well,
It's not for an extension. The question is that you're gonna, that based upon the testimony and the representations, the applicant is permitted until December 4, 2021 to complete his or her resolution compliance and file the plat, making no finding as to whether or not you have jurisdiction over an extension or not.
Okay, now it's clear. I need a motion on that.
So we'll make the motion as articulated by Mr. Gertner that we do not need to take jurisdiction to decide the issues of extension, and that by operation of law, the applicant has until December 4th for resolution compliance and for the filing of his final, what is it called?
The plat,
Plat, thank you.
either by deed or.
So he would have until December 4th to either have the plat signed or the deed signed.
Correct.
So they can file. Until that time, he doesn't have the approval.
Yes.
Did you second it, James? All right, we got a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Book,
Yes.
Ms. Fritsch,
Yes.
Mr. Hurley,
Yes.
Ms. Capello,
Yes.
Ms. Russell,
Yes.
Mr. Costanzo.
Yes.
Mr. Najarian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
All right, you guys got to roll up your sleeves now, a little bit.
I'll take a break. Oh, sure. Why don't somebody just say that? Oh, I'm gonna take a 10-minute break.
He heard you.
Wow, there's a revolution. And we're gonna go to LLC. LLC.
The Faculty Two LLC. Facility, that's right, I can't read.
No faculty. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Salvatore Alfieri on behalf of the applicant. It's been a little while since we've been here before. We've been through earlier public hearings and presented several witnesses. There were two major asks or issues that were raised at the last hearing. One was to give you a quote ski slope plan to show the various activities that would occur on site. And then the other was there was potential concerns from the board and the neighbors about sound. So since the last meeting, we've had our engineer prepare that ski slope plan, which we'll get to momentarily. We also hired an acoustical engineer who I've dealt with in other towns on significant projects. Not that this isn't significant, but big scope. And we're going to bring him up. Because of the passage of time, we wanted to have one of the witnesses come up and just summarize what we've gone through in terms of testimony, what the use is again, so everybody's focused on exactly what's before you tonight, because it did get a little disjointed as the hearings went forward last time. I'm going to introduce Andrew Janusa, who is a partner in the project. Also coincidentally is Nick's father. And he's going to introduce himself because he's been at every hearing and he's gotten up to say things, but he's really never testified. And we wanted you to see, at least from our point of view, this is a family business, family operation. And we felt it would be nice that you can meet him and also he can just summarize for you where we've been. Then Nick is going to come up and run through that ski slope plan. Then our acoustical engineer is going to testify. These are all very brief, by the way. And then lastly, we haven't presented planning testimony. So Ian Borden's going to have to come back up at the end and wrap up with the planning justifications for the use variance. Having said all that, we're going to call Andrew up.
Janusa, thank you for raising your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony, information, questions, or comments you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Can you kindly give us your full name, spell your last, your address, and your affiliation to the applicant, please?
Full name is Andrew Janusa, GEN in USA, 2632 Alair Road, Wall Township, New Jersey, 07719.
And you are a partner with your son and your wife in this project, is that correct?
Correct.
All right, and you've been involved through the whole planning process, both before we've come to the board and then obviously at all the board meetings. You're familiar with the operation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you would you, as a way of summarizing and focusing the board on what the application is about, can you just run through your brief testimony?
Okay, so I've prepared something and I'll briefly go through this and I'll make it as fast as I can. I'd like to take a brief moment to take us back and remind all of us in this room that this application is not for a racetrack. This is not a racetrack. Respectfully, it's not Raceway Park. It's not New Egypt Speedway. For the past 30 years, this property has been a haven for all types of illegal and lawless activities such as dumping, trespassing by people, ATVs, dirt bikes, trucks, Jeeps. These activities took place long before we owned this property, on this property. Due to the amount of time that's gone by since our first meeting, I thought it was important to get up here and speak as one of the principals of this project with and for Nick to let everybody know that our initial statement of operations was very specific. This is a safety training facility. We've partnered with the ATV Safety Institute to teach safety classes here We I've also partnered with the Motorcycle Safety Foundation to do motorcycle safety training as well. One thing that I think we forgot about during this whole process is we submitted on some of our earlier submissions, the OPRA reports, open public records. And in those reports, we did basically an analysis of the year before we owned the project and the 9 months after we owned the project. The year before, there were multiple complaints for noise and dirt bike use. The year that we've had it, there have been 0 complaints of noise and dirt bike use. And I'll say it openly, Nick is riding back there almost every day. And we don't hear and we don't get any noise complaints.
So Mr. Drew, if I may, focus right on that, try to laser focus on that point, because I think you're trying to address a concern that you perceive. So from your knowledge and experience, what elements through design, control, and the like are going to be implemented by you as the applicant to ensure that this remains a safety teaching facility and does not morph or expand into a racetrack? How does that not happen?
It's just not what the project is. It's when we get whatever the approval will be here, we're going to adhere to that approval. We already know what our capacity is there, and it's very, very
So you
small.
get, and I'm interrupting again to try to help you help me, so to speak. So you just talked about that somewhat by design and capacity. Can you expand on the design and capacity as a limiting factor to the facility expanding to a racetrack? Just make believe I'm 5 years old. Explain that to me.
Okay. What I know is we call it our advanced track, okay? That track is only capable of holding 3 to 5 guys at a time. Not really anything more than that. It's not safe past that. It doesn't function well past that. So that's our number there. Now on our trail system, that's a little bit different. We could have 10 different ATVs navigating in our directional trail system, and that'll work just fine. And we can't have really more than that because we wouldn't be able to handle it. And we're not looking to have that as what our operation is. And then when we do our training are small classes. Nick already does small classes. It's 1 student to 5 or, I mean, what's the most students you've ever done? Most students at a time? Okay.
And just to remind the board, there were various levels of testimony in the course of the presentations. We did agree that there will be no more than 15 active vehicles on site at any one time, which is consistent with what Andrew's saying as it relates to the intensity. And that's an enforcement mechanism that the town would have if we ever exceeded that.
I think one of the other things I just wanted to really reiterate here is this is his home. This is where he's going to live. He doesn't want what he does for a living in his backyard on the race level, if you will. He wants to be able to continue to generate the money he generates, training kids and teaching kids.
So would it be an acceptable condition of approval, should the board vote to proceed to approve, that the operation of this facility as a safety training site be limited to owner occupation of the adjoining residents?
We also agreed to that at the prior hearing as well.
Yeah, I'll just close with this. I'd like to end with saying that any noise, traffic, trespassing has been going on long before we purchased this property. We are committed as a family of professionals, myself and my wife, running this business with Nick, operating a successful top-notch operation. And we will adhere to the guidelines that we agreed to during this variance approval.
Any questions, James?
I'm sorry, I have a question. What was the condition that they just agreed to?
That the operation of the traffic safety facility has to be owner occupied, so to speak. The entire site has to be owner occupied. The house, the residence has to be related to the operator of the facility. So that he can't sell the house and still operate the facility separately, or vice versa.
You don't see a legal problem. Police. I was just curious as to whether or not there could be a legal problem with that. I just cited, I asked about a case, which is De Felice. There's another one called Benninger. And in fact, I think Judge Ford just made a decision at a Point Pleasant.
Point Pleasant.
Not too
That-
long
that-
ago.
I think the difference here, this is an occupation and a D1 variant, so it's not, I would differentiate the facts. First, in my opinion, of course, it's up to Mr. Alfieri as well to articulate that. So because the applicant seeking a D1 variance, at some level, this becomes a owner-based or home-based occupation. And the applicant could tie those two principal uses to some extent to the site and interrelate them.
It's not a restraint on alienation.
No, and we actually offered that up as a condition. It wasn't something imposed, just it came up
Well-
because that was their intention all along.
So to be fair to the record, though, the Point Pleasant
I know, I
case,
understand.
the applicant, when it first was accepted, did in fact also offer up the restriction to owner occupation of the rental at first, and then 30 years later, when I think it was a she, went to sell it, they didn't want to enforce that any further. I think the distinguishing factor is that the residence is a permitted use in Point Pleasant Beach. Here, they're seeking the D1 variance.
And the other thing,
Question for you, Al.
yeah,
Right.
Okay, we talked last time in regards to the muffling system.
Okay,
Now, have they decided on a muffler that's going to be acceptable?
w-
Sound?
what we have agreed to in our sound was based on the report that we submitted to only run stock exhausts on factory installed stock exhaust on the ATVs that will ride there, as well as any dirt bikes that ride there. Factory as they come off the line.
and the other thing we stipulated to the last meeting, just so everyone recalls it, is that there would always be someone from the business on site, so there would not be people riding unsupervised. There will always be someone on site to supervise, just to refresh memories as to what we agreed to previously.
I just have a concern in regards to who's going to be able to police somebody else has a louder muffler that comes on the stage, you know? So that's my issue. The loudness issue.
Okay, and we'll get to, and if there's no other questions with Andrew or to Andrew, we can bring up Nick, who's going to run through. Unfortunately, that plan, which is submitted in color, is not showing up in color on the screen. So I don't know if you have hard copies of it. I'm not sure what was submitted. Did you submit extra copies? And oh, there it is, color now. Thank you. Perfect. So if there are no other questions, Andrew, can we bring Nick back up?
So only 5 drivers will be on the course at one time.
Well, no, he'll point out the locations. It'll make more sense.
Well, if you raise your right hand, you've been previously sworn, do you solemnly swear or affirm information, questions, comments, or testimony you're about to present before the board represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And again, you've been previously sworn, just your name and affiliation, please.
Okay, so Nick, name and affiliation. It's on, I think.
Is on,
Yeah.
okay. Name and affiliation.
Name and what your affiliation to the
Name
applicant.
is Nick Janusa, GENNUSA. Did I say the address? Address, am I giving you the address as well or no?
No, just you, how are you affiliated with the project?
I'm partners with my parents on this project.
And the plan that is on the screen is this, what was called a ski slope plan, has different tracks with different colors. Can you run through for the board what each color represents and then tie that into what your father said about the number of riders, please.
Okay, I can start with the number of riders, which would be 5 at once on a course.
Yeah, but which course?
On the advanced,
Right.
on the advanced riding area, which would be the main one in the center of that. Oh, let me get my laser here. The blue, dark blue, if you want to call it, advanced riding area, right in the middle.
And then what's the gold below that?
The gold below that would be the junior training area, which is more of a beginner riding track. Basically, riders that would be on this are not so advanced. They're more for beginners, so it'd be on smaller machines for the most part.
And how many would be on that track at any one time?
The same would be 5.
And then what's the red lines?
The red line, if you see here, goes down. They go here to that little square, down a little square. They're about 20 by 20 areas flattened out. That would be spectating areas, just so they could stay out of the way and watch, whether it be their child riding that day or related to somebody at the facility.
And then the green areas?
The green area all around these squiggly looking lines would be the trail system, would be the guided trail tours.
And what is the guided trail tour?
Guided trail tour would be either myself or another employee or my father in the future, which would be a few people riding right behind us. Not, obviously not a racing field. All this is a guided trail tour through existing trails.
And do you recall how many acres is this whole complex?
65.
Okay. And if the board were to approve this application, you would agree that this plan is locked in time. You can't change or expand those trails in any way without coming back to this board. Do you agree to that?
Yes.
Okay. That's all for Nick, Mr. Chair.
You've indicated, the advanced track will have 5 vehicles in training, the junior track, I guess we'll call it, the gold track. I'm sorry. look at my
Correct.
color. The blue track will have 5 active vehicles. The gold track will have 5 active vehicles. Will they be training simultaneously, or how is that going to be structured?
Not typically. I mean, they would be 5 at once. So if I'm teaching a lesson that day with somebody's child, there'd be a small group, and this is 5 maximum. So it'd be pretty much at the same time for 10, 20 minutes and stop, if
So
that
you
answers
wouldn't-
your question.
So it's not your intention to do an advanced training class and then have someone else train the gold course?
No, it would be completely separate. I mean, how I've done it in the past, if I were to do it, not that I've done one here, but if I've been to a facility before, I would have trained in one area, and then it could be hours later would be the junior area or a smaller track. And again, this junior track is for kids, young kids.
Follow-up question, if I may, Chair. With regards to the spectator area that was designated, will those individuals will also be allowed to use ATVs, or is that foot traffic?
No, foot traffic only.
And the green trail, I don't know what you call that.
It's a trail.
The trail. Now, can that be used anytime by anyone just traveling through, or is that also something?
No, that would be only used for guided trail tours. So it'd be guided by, say, it would be myself and people riding behind me in a small group. They cannot wander off and do what they want. They're going to be under supervision the entire time.
And again, my question is, can any of these 3 tracks be used simultaneously?
They could, but it wouldn't happen. They could though, for safety reasons, if that's what you're asking, if they're not crossing, or is that what you were getting
Not
at?
so much cross, just usage.
Absolutely, it could be.
Thank you.
But the question, through the chair, the question is, are your operations going to utilize them at the same time?
No,
And would you accept that as a condition of approval, should the board vote to approve, to ensure that all 3 tracks would not be utilized at the same time?
sure.
Does that assist?
Thank you.
It was previously submitted. I'm not sure if it was marked as yeah.
Well, we can mark it A1 with today's date, and that's
Okay.
just as, oh, A9 then.
A better, okay.
Have a question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, James.
Nick, the guided, you said the green is for guided tours?
Guided trail tour. It's a one-way trail system. So there's no crossing, there's no going backwards. It's start and end.
What's the purpose? Just to show somebody the course?
You'd be surprised how many people are interested in just going through the woods. The tracks aren't for everybody. And the purpose of that would be a different type of enjoyment in the ATV world. Some people like to go through the woods and it attracts a good amount of people. Not so much myself. I'm more of the track person, but it does attract a lot of people and it's very enjoyable.
Kind of like people wanting to go for a horse ride through, take a trail ride.
Well, if you take a person that
see
lives
nature.
in the city, it's a very different feel for them and they might feel like they're out west somewhere for that type of feel. If you're living where there's houses all in and around every day, it's a good change up for somebody and a lot of people do show interest in it.
Obviously, you feel there's a demand for that.
Of course.
Is there a separate fee for just going on that?
A separate what?
Fee.
It's part of the training. The training? Yes.
But you're going to charge people to do this.
Oh,
Yeah.
fee. Yes,
Fee.
yes, of course.
Fee, yes.
I'm sorry, it was a little. No, don't be.
Thank you. You said there were going to be 5 on the blue and the gold. How many would be on the guided trail tours?
Be 5 to 10, and those are on a different type of ATV, which are insanely quiet, in my opinion, that are quieter than most regular generators or lawnmowers. You almost can't even hear them, the ones that will be on the trails. That's why that trail system is where it is.
Will they be by themselves or you'll be taking them on the tour?
It's a guided tour, so I'd be taking them.
So 5 to 10 vehicles will be following you?
Max, correct.
Trying to get an understanding.
Yep, that's fine. No, it's not. That was all within, if you remember, along the fence lines, all the wooded areas. I think it would have been all to your left the whole time. That's all within there, the green. So that's not what you did that day. That's all inside of, when you were there that day, we did a complete outskirt of that entire thing. Correct. And that is not, the trail that you did is only for myself or my father, just as a patrol loop, as we call it, just for, monitoring the fence area.
The trail was
Yeah,
a
it's, the
perimeter
trail is not part of what we did that day. It's all within that. We don't want people going up near the fence area. Okay, let me see here. So the green is all the proposed trails here. The fence you rode along is this one right here. All down there, up and this way. That is the fence.
And that won't be used by any riders.
No.
So again, through the chair, and I guess this would also be for Mr. Purpuro, would it behoove the applicant, again, presuming the board acts favorably, that they show what I'll deem a maintenance trail with a different color and demark it as not to be utilized for the public, but it's only for the maintenance of the facility? Just for purposes, again, you would know exactly what, because the board went on that trail. There was a clear perception that that trail would be marketed too. Your testimonies just cleared that up and said, no, that's just for internal maintenance purposes. But I think if it actually physically exists, it probably should be shown.
We have 5 signs along that trail where
But
the,
we would agree on the plan if you wanted another color for
Right.
that. That's certainly a.
it does say in the start of that trail, authorized personnel only in about 5 different spots.
Not doubting that, but remember that the whole purpose that the board wanted to see this map was to have, and Mr. Alfieri refers to it, I guess I did too, sort of a ski slope sort of demarcation. Because every trail that exists out there should show a color, so that if there are enforcement questions, somebody can relate easily what they see in real time on the ground to what has been submitted to those who are charged with enforcement.
We would add that as a condition of approval, certainly.
I was on vacation when you invited the board members to come upon. I would have been a little upset if I didn't hear a vehicle on the property at the time. For sound, for noise.
If you didn't hear
I
one,
didn't. Did you have one running?
when the board members were there, I did actually, yes.
You did.
Yes,
They heard the sounds.
they watched me ride.
If there's no other questions of Nick, we're going to bring up Norm Dottie, our acoustical engineer. Norm? I go here or there? That's easily.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for raising your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony, information, questions or comments you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Can you kindly give us your full name, spell your last, your affiliation, and through the chairman, your credentials?
I'm Norman Dottie, D-O-T-T-I. I'm the principal of Russell Acoustics in Point Pleasant, New Jersey.
And Mr.
I'm a licensed professional engineer and licensed planner in New Jersey. I'm board certified in acoustics by the Institute of Noise Control Engineers. I'm
And Norm, just a little more background.
Thank you.
I met Mr. Dottie when we went for Donald Trump's golf course in Colts Neck. We needed a helistop and sound was a huge issue with a helistop, and Norm came in and did that. And then I've done other applications with him over the years. But in your history and testimony before various boards and agencies, have you ever reviewed motocross facilities, race car facilities, motorbike facilities, anything else to get some context as to what the sounds would be that are generated from these types of facilities?
I have, and in my letter a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned a specific set of tests I did down in Galloway on very similar application.
And also, just by way of foundation, you did prepare a report and you did submit that report in advance of this hearing, is that correct?
Yes.
You've also visited the site?
Yes.
Okay, and you have an understanding of the business operation because you did discuss the operation with the applicants when you were at the site?
Well, I know it from the standpoint of what's been proposed on ORVs. ORV is what the state calls off-road vehicle. So I'll probably use that term instead of ATV. ORV is more inclusive. Anyway, yes, I reviewed the documents like the one we have up on the screen now and discussed the proposed operations.
All right, and can you give the board a little background as to how you measure sound and how sound has to be regulated by both the municipal ordinance and the state statute?
Okay. State of New Jersey has a noise regulation, NJAC 7:29. As it turns out, Jackson Township adopted something called the model noise ordinance. In order for a municipality to have its own ordinance, the state regulation says it has to be approved by DEP. And DEP will only approve what is called the model noise ordinance. As a member of the State Noise Control Council, I help write it, so I know it fairly well. And you've adopted that, which means you can enforce, and the limits in the Jackson Township ordinance are the same limits as the state has. You have an enforcement mechanism there. I would assume that you have certified people who can measure the sound, that they've been through the necessary training course that's put on by Rutgers, that they have the appropriate instrumentation and sort. So in general, I would say to people that you have a mechanism that you can call on, in this case, the county, and Ocean County does have an enforcement mechanism, as do all the counties, to come out and do sound studies. But in your case, you can also do that yourself and enforce it. So that's one thing that you have. And it's not something that you could waive. The applicant's not asking for a variance on meeting the noise standards. You can't do that. They have to meet it. They have to meet it now, because it's a performance standard. They have to meet it 5 years from now. So that's protection that you have. And the limit in particular here is 65 dBA. dBA is a measure of sound. It's the primary one that the state uses. It's probably the most commonly used measure of sound in the world. And it relates to how loud sounds appear to people.
And is that measured at the property line?
It's measured at or within a receiving property.
Okay,
Mr.
so
Alfieri, could you have him say that again? I didn't hear that whole sentence, sir. Could you just repeat what you said again, specifically to where that measurement has to be?
It is at or within a receiving property.
Receiving
for an-
property.
Receiving property of an affected person. So for just hypothetically, across the highway, you have a receiver over there and you have a source on this side of the highway. The limit applies across the highway or across the railroad tracks or beyond another piece of property
or a next door neighbor.
or a next door neighbor. It takes a complaint from an affected person. So the sound level limits do not apply at an empty field, for example. They don't apply at a house that's not occupied because you don't have an affected person.
Now, the sound levels that are so we understand sound is regulated and we understand there's an enforcement mechanism and we now understand where the sound has to be measured in order to be determined whether you comply or not. Under these circumstances, this particular use, what type of decibel level would be achieved at the closest receiving point, or even at the property line, if you have that?
Well, it depends on what type of vehicle and in particular the distance. One gentleman was asking about the mufflers. In order for an ORV, an ATV, a dirt bike to be sold in the United States, it has to meet the EPA requirements for a whole bunch of criteria, including sound emissions, which are 82 dBA at 50 feet. And that's done when the vehicle is in an acceleration mode. It can be done as a static test or a dynamic test, and I've done that, and they're really hard to do. By comparison, the limit that we have that applies here is 65 dBA daytime. Daytime is 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's outside of the proposed hours, as I understand it. And I'm often asked, so I'll tell you the answer. Well, how loud is 65 dBA? Two people standing normal face-to-face distance, which we are not. We were up like here, just carrying on a normal conversation in a normal voice, not using microphones or anything. We generate about 65 dBA at each other's ear. So it's normal conversational level. And in fact, if you go back to the founding documents on the noise regulation, the daytime 65 dBA limit is predicated on speech. That's where they get that number from. They just didn't pull it out of the air. So that's the limit that has to be met. Now, depending on what type of vehicle and how it's being driven and the distance, you're going to have different sound levels. So, the question that had been put to me was people wanted to know what sort of sound levels can be expected from the proposed use. So I took the EPA level of 82 dBA and extrapolated it out to various distances. There's also data out there on typical ATV operations under acceleration, under cruise, and I use those. And I prepared a graphic, that's the third page of my report, to show how those sound levels decrease with distance, because they do. There's laws of physics, and yeah, you have your legal laws. Well, us engineers have our laws of physics that extend the sound levels out. And for a small source, as distance increases, the sound level drops off 6 dBA as you double distance. Now that presumes that there aren't other factors as well to add additional kind of reduction. And I don't know, are we getting the graphic there?
Yeah. While we're pulling up the graphic, you mentioned additional factors that might attenuate the sound. Do the woods and the various trees form service some form of attenuation to the sound?
They can. Now, I have to say that with some caution. In my report, I mentioned that a chunk of the site in the center area there in particular is, as I understand, an ex-gravel pit. When I went out there, to me, it looked like a gravel pit. When the walls of the pit are in between an ATV and a receiver, like a house, then that barrier acts as a barrier and will provide additional sound level reduction in addition to just the distance. How much reduction? If it just blocks line of sight, 5 dBA more, i.e. lower sound. It could be as much as 10, but let's be safe and go with 5. Now, to trees, normally when we do an analysis, we ignore foliage because, and I get this with planning boards and the sort, the planning board wants to put 3 rows of overlapping arborvitae between the source and the receiver, and that's going to be a noise barrier, right, Mr. Dottie? The answer is no, it doesn't. It makes no difference whatsoever. However, when you have hundreds of feet of trees, then it starts to be effective. How effective? If you go to the ISO standard 9613-2, which is an international standard on sound propagation outdoors. We use that in modeling sites for computer modeling. The number that they have works out to be 5 dBA reduction for 100 meters. And if you don't do metric, that's 330 feet. So if you have 300 plus feet of trees, you can get about an additional 5 dBA. We don't necessarily have that here. So more conservatively, 2 to 3 additional depending, but the graphic in my report, which, do we have that up or not? It was submitted.
The report was submitted, I don't have but the end result is, and for some reason, it's not up there. Do you have the hard copies of the reports? Oh, good. What page is it, Norm?
It's page 3. It's
Page 3
titled
for those.
ORV sound levels. I prepared it. Across the x-axis there, horizontal axis, that's distance. And the vertical axis is the dBA sound level. And I show 3 different curves there. The upper one, the top one, is using that EPA number of 82 dBA at 50 feet. As you can see, as distance increases, note that that's a logarithmic scale. Decibels are a logarithmic function. As you increase distance, the sound level goes down. The middle line is for an aggressively operated ATV, and the bottom line is a typical ATV in a cruise mode. These were published information. As a cross-check, my own experience, I went back and I looked, I mentioned the Galloway project there. We tested dirt bikes, ATVs, racing bikes, a multitude, single, multiple in combination. The levels at 50 feet range, depending on the type of bike, or I should say ORV, range from the high 60s to a max of 72. These sound levels, too, I should mention, are maximum permitted sound levels or maximum sound levels. So when a ORV goes by, its maximum sound level is these kind of levels that you're seeing on the graphic. It's not the average sound level. If you have several of them in a train, one goes by, the other goes by, the other goes by. They're far enough apart, a few seconds apart, and you get individual maxima. They don't really add up as you might think. Yeah, there's multiple sources out there, but their maximum sound levels are not all happening at the same time. So you don't add those up. But I found the levels that I personally measured and these published levels here in the graphs are very consistent with each other. They're believable kind of
So
numbers.
now let's get you back to this property. If, based upon all that data that you have, do you have an opinion as to whether any of the adjacent property owners, and they're the people that are closest to this property, will be impacted by the sound that would exceed the permitted sound level of 65?
Again,
dB?
referring to my graph, there's a horizontal dotted line on there that's 65 dBA. To answer the question, how, for the different sources there, the EPA compliant, the aggressively driven, and the cruising type unit, how far away from the proper, how close can you come to the property line before you hit 65 dBA? And for the vehicle running at the EPA maximum, it's 354 feet. For the aggressively driven ATV, 158 feet, and for the cruising one, 79, or let's call it 80 feet.
So at the worst case, at 80 feet off of the property line, a sound will be heard that's similar to you and I talking in that distance we were just talking.
For the
Decibel.
typical ATV in a cruise condition, if it's a louder ATV, they have to be further back from the property line.
Oh, so I missed, you're talking about the sound source being further. I was reversing it. So worst case is the sound source has to be 300 feet off the property line to meet that.
Well, if it's an EPA, if it's running at the EPA maximum, which when I did my testing, I never measured that's that high of a sound level, but that's 354 feet.
Okay. And do we know, and maybe Ian knows, how far that green, the distance is? Can you flip one more, Anthony? There, I can't read them, but. Can you blow up the bottom for us?
Let me try and help.
I still can't see it.
This line here to the, I believe that's a training track. That's 200 feet. To the far side over there is 400 feet.
Okay, so again, the loudest vehicle, how far off the property line would that vehicle have to operate in order to trigger a excessive sound, a sound that's in excess of 65?
Ignoring the pit, ignoring anything from the trees, 354 feet from one that's outputting at the EP, that just meets the EPA criteria and is being driven in that manner.
All right, so that would be inside that dotted line,
It would
which
be
is 400 feet.
400 feet is to the upper
Right.
dotted line that we
Upper
have
dotted
there.
line, I apologize. Okay, and then the children bikes, if you will, that they're using on the gold track, which is that bottom track, what type of sound do they generate? And would their proximity to, because they're only 200 feet or so from the property line?
Well, if they're being driven around a training environment, they're small bikes, they would not be, from my personal experience in testing them, would not be producing that. It's going to come down to what kind of bikes are being driven in what manner. And that's control. It's how do you what prevents somebody from going out over to the police parking lot and doing donuts in the parking lot? The answer is the police. You're not supposed to do that sort of thing. So they have to enforce that the things are driven in a proper manner, that they have the correct mufflers on them, which the way they're sold, they're supposed to have. Point is, in my opinion, the site, to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty, the operation can be conducted in a manner complies with the state and township noise regulations and ordinances respectively. And in fact, it has to do that.
I'm sorry, sir, bring the microphone up to your mouth. I couldn't hear that last statement.
I believe what I was saying was that the site, in my opinion, can be operated in a way that will comply with the state and township noise regulations and ordinances. And it has to, it's.
But the
complied.
question is, you say it can be, is the way in which the applicant proposes to operate it, will it meet those criteria in your expert opinion?
From the testimony that I've heard and what I've read, yes. Is it technically, is it possible for somebody to do something absurd out there? Of course it is. That's not what's been proposed. That's not what anyone has talked to me about doing. And somebody says, well, what guarantees do we have that that's going to happen? The answer is you can enforce it.
Well, the question is, so again, I'll just follow up on the chairman's sort of comment, addressing it in a different manner. So the testimony is there won't be any more than 15 of these, you refer to them as off-road vehicles operating at the same time. If all 15 are running as quickly as they can, layman's terms, it's your testimony that operation limited to 15 could occur and meet state and municipal noise ordinance.
Remember that the 15 are not all on the tracks closest to the surrounding properties. They're spread out. They're 5, 5, and 5, I believe. So the answer is, in my opinion, yes. In my experience, yes.
I follow up. Let's assume worst case, right? Let's assume worst case, because I think that follows your methodology up to this point. If 15 vehicles are congregated all together at the 400 feet away from the property line, and they fire up initially all together, all 15. I know it's in for a very small period of time, but I want to project out worst case scenario. If all 15 of those are 354 feet away from the property line, not the nearest receptor, but just the property line, is it still your testimony that the site would be meeting the noise requirements of the state of New Jersey and the ordinance?
If you have all 15 of the heaviest bikes all putting out sound at the EPA maximum limit at 400 feet, it would be over.
At 400 feet, but that's,
Correct.
and all right, so 400 feet's the property line.
But just.
But that, my question was not necessarily to the, I'm sorry, I might have misstated. If they were 400 feet away from the property line, would they still meet the noise ordinance requirements, which is at a receptor, not the property line, a receptor?
They would be over the limit.
Right. So just because you have 15 noise generators at 82 decibels apiece doesn't mean it's 82 times 15 decibels. It means it's a very marginal amount above 82. Is that correct?
Perhaps if I may pose the question, I think what you're asking about additive sounds.
It's not cumulative, correct?
It's not like putting money in the bank.
Correct.
So if you have 85 and you put in another 85, you have 170. No, it doesn't work. that way.
Correct.
It's
You
logarithmic.
have maybe 82 and slightly above 82 for the first, for the next one.
Theoretically, you have two 82s add together, they're 85.
85. So it's about 3 decibels per additional.
As you double, correct.
Right.
And that's, now whether that is a realistic scenario or not, I will have to leave you to decide that. I personally don't think it is, but you asked, I tried to answer the question as you asked it.
So you visited the site, and what were your observations along Hawken Road as far as, I'm not suggesting you did any readings, or maybe you did, I'm not quite certain, but what were your just general observations along Hawken Road as far as background level noises? What is the ambient background in your approximation?
I measure, well, number one, I did not take any measurements out there. I did not do any ambient
Okay.
noise study. The ambient actually, for as far as compliance with your ordinance or the state regulation, ambient has nothing to do with it.
I'm just wondering what your observations may have
What-
been.
Yeah, and when it gets into sound levels, I've been doing this for 50 years. I've learned not to, I don't have a calibrated ear. I don't know anybody who does. And I sure don't take cell phone measurements. I use calibrated good instrumentation. I didn't take any sound level surveys. I do, having said that, I do a lot of ambient noise studies as far as site development. And in general, there's more sound out there than people think there is. It's not a quiet world, and this is the only sound in the area. You have cars and trucks and motorcycles driving by down the road. You have people mowing their lawn. In the summer, you have air conditioners and swimming pool pumps. In the fall, we're getting into that time now. At night, the insect noises can be louder than anything out there and just devastate my noise studies when I do them. So there's a lot of other sounds and they all weigh into it, but from a compliance standpoint, whether it's real quiet out there or real noisy out there, as far as the surrounding sounds go, that has nothing to do with any operation complying. We're not complying with the sound standard.
Thank you.
That's all for Mr. Dottie.
Do you have any questions from board members?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just to follow up on what Mr. Duddy just said. First of all, did you actually do sound measurements at this site?
No.
Okay. Then the question becomes, I guess your opinions are based on models that are available to you.
Is that a question?
Pardon?
You're asking me what my opinions are based on?
No, I'm getting to it. My question is with the ambient sound. Does the generation from a specific site such as this, does the ambient sound accelerate or increase the sound generated by this operation?
The sound, if you could shut down the county.
If I'm a neighbor next door, I guess I'm asking, if I'm a neighbor next door, the question becomes, there's going to be a sound generator by this operation if it's approved. But there's also ambient sounds that's out there from the roads, from whatever else it may be.
Correct.
What's the impact to me as a neighbor?
It really depends on what the magnitude of those ambient sounds are and even the type of the ambient sounds. For example, generally speaking, the biggest source of ambient sounds, community noise, is motor vehicle traffic. If you add in another sound source that's motor vehicle traffic, then it's just not as discernible because it's mixed in with the same type of noise. If I bring in a helicopter, mentioned the golf course, if I bring in a helicopter, that has a different kind of sound, so people notice it more. So it's really going to depend on how loud those sounds are. We don't have the situation here where the site is operating at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's just around 2 to 3 in the morning is when the ambient is the lowest, because motor vehicle traffic is lowest. It's daytime operations. So you have all those other things that are going on daytime wise that are going to mix in.
Okay, just one other question. You mentioned that there will be mufflers that are required here. It's a regulation that they are required by has to come from the manufacturer or something of that nature.
Correct. The manufacturer, in order to sell it, has to have EPA approval on it. Not only has to have a muffler, it needs to meet the maximum sound level criteria.
I understand. I only question it because I remember when I was a kid, and yes, they did have cars back then.
I know.
I used to have friends that would get what do they call them? Glass pack mufflers or something, and they were louder than anything you have. And they were originally, the car came with original mufflers and it got modified. how do we protect something like that from happening here? I know your testimony is based on the mufflers that are provided by manufacturer. This is what the sound levels are going to be. What if somebody modifies that muffler? How do we deal with that? Is it your testimony that we would have to enforce that as a municipality?
Well, you could, but that's really, in
The
my
app-
opinion, that's up to the site operators to not permit that sort of thing to happen.
Well,
That's been, and my experience is that's what happens. Their business is on the line. They don't want to get a noise citation.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to address that. We have to go back to what I was saying earlier. This is a training facility. We are teaching kids mainly respectful and responsible riding. They come with a bike like that, they're sent home. Not acceptable, not allowed. Just period, not allowed. And I'll give you a little background on that.
Well, I'm understanding this is something more than just a training facility. It's a training facility for the kids. But then you have this area that was in blue, that was for different types of riders. And then you have this area in green that goes for tours that people can ride around on. That's not training to
Well,
me.
well, let me stop you with that because the training, so, and Nick was saying it, but I want to reiterate, somebody would come and you have to understand, I gave a new version of that ATV Safety Institute brochure, and I'm sure all of you have it there. We're partnering with all the major manufacturers. When they sell an ATV in the state of New Jersey, they pay us to train. If you bought an ATV tomorrow, you bought a Yamaha ATV, Yamaha would give you this training certificate and you would get a free training by us. We're teaching you how to ride. And when we're done with our safety training course, then we'll take you through this guided trail tour. And then if you loved it the first time, you bring your bike home after you learned how to ride and you want to come back, we'll do it again with you. But and I want to go back and just say one other thing. We did have a small, we'll call it a pit bike track at our home in Wall Township. Okay. And we have had in many times, Nick had his friends over to ride. If a bike came off that trailer or out of that pickup and it was loud or didn't have a stock exhaust, sent home, don't ride. Those are the rules. And we're going to enforce the rules. I am so confident that we will not get complaints here. We're not getting them today. Why would we get them? They're not coming.
I understand that, and some of the board members had mentioned that at a prior meeting where, we may feel very comfortable with Nick operating this place. But what if Nick is not operating this place?
It doesn't operate. It won't be there.
What if he sells it?
He can't sell it. We've agreed not to let it be sold like that.
We can have that discussion later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Andrew. Yes, sir. Wouldn't it have been smart of you to ask this man to do the testing on your property to convince us in regards to the
Well, we weren't asked to do. We weren't, on our last meeting, what was,
a character witness here, and he had the knowledge to bring to the table, so we feel comfortable in regards to the sound.
okay. What we were specifically asked to do at the last meeting was give generic what an ATV gives out. I bet you can go back to the testimony. What you can get from the internet or from other studies that were done, what sound levels are put out by ATVs or dirt bikes. He went by that as well as his own information. And I've spent thousands of dollars with him just to get him here and do this, to do that sound study. I mean, where does it end? This application's a year old. And we keep spending. What he provided you is what is going to happen there.
Mr. Chairman, if I can, just as a, just for clarification, at the last meeting, when the subject of potential noise migration off the site was brought up, it was the board did specifically request that a noise analysis be provided for further review. And there's a difference between an analysis and a study, all right? So,
I think
from
Mr.
my
Hill,
rec.
respectfully, let the board determine.
No, I'm,
I hear you.
all I'm
but-
gonna say,
no, no,
I'm
no,
just
but I heard also what the.
I'm just reinforcing what my recollection is of the prior meeting, and I was, you didn't let me finish either. if the board wants the next level beyond an analysis, then obviously, just like you asked for the analysis, you could ask for a study. That's entirely up to the board.
I'm not so sure the board necessarily would understand what the difference is. And I think the chairman's point is simply that if you have it, and the board can determine whether or not the analysis based on the background and on the facts is sufficient or not. I grant you that. I think the chairman's point is that if you have the professional there who walked the property, why not take the extra step? That's an applicant's determination. Just because the board asked for it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't foresee the potential that this additional information would be made. So I think everyone is factually true. The applicant, the applicant's partner indicated that some of that determination may have been based on economics, that it's a year old, that this is the third time they're there. It's their determination, it's their case. They can run it as it chooses. The chairman's point again is you had him there, maybe you should have thought about that, but the applicant is left to its own determination.
I have to say noise was an issue for me too, but I certainly didn't intend to say, just bring me a model and tell me what it likes. I would like to know what the impact on the neighbor is going to be, because there are objections from the neighbors in that regard. And I would assume that someone would actually do on-site tests of even 15 vehicles. So I know exactly what the sound is. I keep, and Mr. Alfieri, you know better than I do. This is the burden of the applicant. This board has no burden whatsoever on this application. This is not an adversarial operation. The applicant has a burden of proof and to show everything. Knowing that there's a noise issue, I agree that I would be happier and better informed to know that someone actually did a sound test and I knew exactly what the parameters were, how that sound test was taken and what the results were.
We'll have to discuss that amongst ourselves before we ask the board to take action. Never. I like the way you said it better, Mr. Chair. We will have to talk to the applicant before we ask you to vote and determine whether we want to take that next step. And we also have to put planning testimony on. So I don't know if we could take a couple-minute break, because you don't want to hear planning testimony if we're coming back another time.
If I may, through the chair. Mr. Dottie, it's been suggested, and I think it was an objector, if memory serves, it's been suggested that the configuration of that site can work in such a way that it would result not in an attenuation or a reduction in the sound, but actually an increasing in the sound. If I remember the testimony of, I think it was an objector, who said that because of the shape of the property, that bowl shape, that somehow if sound is coming up and emanating out of that bowl, that it would actually increase the sound. Do you find that that is an incorrect conclusion from your expert point of view?
Yes.
Thank you.
As I said earlier, when you have the ORVs down in the pit, to the extent that the line of sight from the vehicle to the receiver is blocked by the terrain, just the terrain, that's going to give you a minimum of a 5 decibel, 5 dBA reduction in the sound. It's not going to magnify it. In order to magnify or amplify, you have to put energy into something. There's no other source of energy. It's not coming out of the karma, something like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We need 2 minutes to discuss something. Great.
You telling me to think about it?
He said it. I didn't want to take your copy. I didn't want to take your copy.
We've heard several of the board members' comments about testing further. We thought we did what you asked for last time. We're willing to do more. We're willing to do whatever it takes to get this approved, but we want to make it clear, at least in our minds, what we're doing versus what you expect so that we don't have a misunderstanding. What Mr. Dottie says is how they typically do this, these sound testing is they have these monitor machines where they'll put around different sections of the perimeter of the property and they record sound. And then they're going to run the bikes, the number of bikes that are necessary to demonstrate whatever's being tested is consistent with what would happen if it were approved. And then he'll have numbers. And then he's going to come back with a report with those numbers. If that's what you're looking for.
Well, in that regard, the parameters of the test, I think, should be brought to light, because are we testing you know, the green, the blue track with
Well,
five
that-
vehicles.
we're gonna do- yeah,
the
we're gonna
gold
do-
track with five vehicles, the tree, you know, and designation, so we know what
We're going to test exactly what we've said is going to happen on site. And we're going to also be able to tell you what vehicles were running the day that the tests were made, so you understand what was being tested.
So I don't want to box, respectfully on behalf of the board, I don't want to box the board into telling you what evidence you need to present,
Well,
right? I think that's a slippery slope that I would like to protect the board against. You've heard, you presented over the years, you know, applications. It's your burden of proof, as members of the board have articulated. You've heard the concerns. What you're articulating is something that probably would be sufficient, but it's your call as to the level at which you, when I mean you, the applicant, needs to provide to the board to prove your case, to determine whether or not, as your expert indicated, right? He said that within a reasonable degree of his engineering expertise, as testified, it would meet the state's and municipal standards. I think the board has said, well, we'd like to see numbers to prove that, but
So,
beyond
okay,
that.
understood.
it's
So
your call.
here's the next question. Ambient noise came up. Do you need to know what the ambient noise, the testimony was it has nothing to do with the sound. So do you need an ambient noise study? Because that gives another level of.
Mr. Alfieri, let
Yes.
me just make a comment on your comment. We will do whatever we need to do to get you to approve it. I honestly have not made a decision on this case. I haven't even heard your planner yet, okay? I have given you some concerns that I have about noise based on comments that we've heard from the neighbors. We, you know, just to make the record clear, we're not telling you what you have to do to get an approval. What you have to do to get approval is meet your burden under the statute. That's the way it is. So you and not you, but your client can do whatever that client thinks is necessary to meet its burden and get an approval.
Okay, so we need a date certain so we can
So.
come back with a
Mr.
report.
Chairman, oh, well, may I apologize, so I don't forget. And maybe this is perhaps for the board. I know the applicant does not then want to present its planner yet.
Correct.
It's your call. Is there a reason why?
We shouldn't because he needs the foundation to provide planning
Okay,
testimony.
fair enough.
And the other item is, I'd like to see the board members come back to the property when you have more than just one vehicle.
Well, that leads to the last thing I was going to say. Since the last meeting, we've attempted several times through Dawn to get other board members to come and nobody came to the site. So we would love for the people to come, you guys to come to the site.
I'd
We're ready.
like to get a legal opinion on that too, whether it's a good idea for us to do that. You know, we're not capable to making a determination as to whether or not the sound is too loud. I mean, I can hardly hear anything according to my wife, so.
But,
You never know.
but the
You never
site
know
visit,
what sound levels can be, so I wouldn't know if it's loud or not loud.
but the site visit isn't really for you to see the sound. It's really for you to understand the layout. It's impossible to appreciate this property unless you're there. And that map does no justice to what the vastness of this property. So we think it would be extremely helpful, but again, we can't make you come. It's entirely up to you whether you come or not. But we're going to extend the invitation again through the board secretary, and we would love for those who haven't been there to try and make it.
All right, so I'm gonna open up to the public. Are you done? Are you done?
Mr. Chairman, I cut off Ms. Rich first.
Good.
For me personally, I would prefer going there and possibly being at one of the neighbors' homes that is complaining about noise and listening to it. All the grass in the world aren't going to rain, honestly, it doesn't, in my opinion. Make sense to spend the money. I would rather listen to it myself.
Good, so we have some neighbors coming up. All right, bring the first neighbor to come on up, and you have 5 minutes, and try not to say the same thing you did at the last meeting.
Well,
Get creative,
Okay.
And ask
Do I
any
need to
questions.
say my name or anything?
Well, so let's hang on for a second.
Okay,
So before, I appreciate, thank you for your patience.
no problem.
So respectfully, right, you've heard very limited additional testimony at this
Right.
point. I think what the chairman is saying is that certainly the public will have the opportunity to comment on the totality of the case, what they
Okay.
call the case in chief. So at this point, we would really only, and the board would only entertain additional comments based upon the testimony you've heard. You're not losing your right, and you see the chairman and the board are very meticulous in ensuring the public has the opportunity to
Okay.
speak. Is that basically what? you're-
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
so ma'am, since you're here,
Yes,
if you'd raise your hand, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony, questions, comments you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
absolutely.
Can you kindly give us your full name, spell
Yep.
your last and your address?
My name is Janet Kane, Kane. I live at 100 Leanne Drive, right behind their property. Okay? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, he was talking about how he's losing a lot of money, you know, paying all these fees and everything. How much money do you think I'm gonna lose if this track goes in? My house right now is gonna be worth nothing. Who's gonna buy my house, knowing that there's a track that gives off all that noise? And even if they say there's no noise, there's noise. I don't care what anybody says. And I've been there for 32 years. Me and my husband put my life savings into this house. And for somebody that doesn't even live in my town, or they just moved there, to come in and try to change something that's been there I've been there 32 years. It was always residential. All of a sudden you're coming in and you have money because I don't have money. I'm the little person. I have to bow to you and say, okay, it's all right with me. No, I'm going to lose my house can be worth, you know what it's going to be worth. It's not going to be worth anywhere. Probably what I paid for it is what I'll get for it. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. And I don't care what anybody says. You all, would you people want that in your backyard? Would you want that? How would your houses sell? You know, I hear New Egypt all the time. I chose to live there, but
So-
New Egypt is 2 miles away and I could hear it.
Yeah, so ma'am, let me just say this.
Okay.
Some of your argument
Yes,
is focused on testimony we really haven't heard yet,
okay,
which would be from their planner.
okay.
Now, so I would just ask that
To
you
come back
say-
next time?
Well, because you'll hear presuming the planning testimony will be addressed to how and why this affects the character of the neighborhood,
Okay,
which is really what your argument is about, trying to
Right.
distill it a little bit. So the board hears your concerns. You're going to hear, though, additional testimony that attempts to address that,
okay.
which will allow you to ask either more pointed questions or make more specific comments. So trying to help you just to know where the context is.
If this thing gets approved, it's not gonna do me any good either way. So I might as well just pack my bags and like put a for sale sign on my house and say, see you.
Relax. Thank
No,
you.
I'm very upset.
Through
I'm
the
sorry.
chair,
Yes.
question.
Yes,
You indicated that you lived there approximately 30 years.
32 years, yes.
So what was it like before they purchased this
The
property?
guys used to ride their dirt bikes, but the police would come and stop them.
But the
my-
noise, all right, but
And it wasn't a constant in the same area.
there
You know, they
wasn't,
would go
there
through
was
Fires Mills.
noise and activity prior to their owning the property.
Probably the same or a little bit more.
And so now,
What's with this?
what's
What's with
ma'am,
this? Yes.
you address the board, don't?
Okay, well, they
No,
shouldn't make.
That's right, he should not make comments. He's
Am I-
admonished not to. You're on,
I'm
you have the
sorry, I'm
mic.
sorry.
No, you're right. You have the mic.
I'm sorry.
So my question, since they've owned the property,
Yes.
is there
It's gotten
discernible
loud. It's gotten
difference?
louder. Nothing where you can't deal with it, but sometimes you want to sit in your backyard on a Sunday.
Is there more activity? Is there less activity?
No,
I'm
there's
trying to
more,
get a
there's
flavor from it.
obviously more activity. Obviously, because they're in one confined area. Otherwise, before, they would ride through there, they'd go down to Kyers Mills, they'd cut through down Stump Tavern or whatever. Now it's in one confined area right behind our houses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Alfieri, do you have any questions?
Anybody else? Come on up. Get sworn in.
Sir, thank you for raising your right hand. Do you,
Yeah,
sir?
my name is Gene Rosinski. I live on Eagle Road.
But you went too fast.
Oh,
Can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony, information, questions, or comments you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes, I do.
And I apologize as I cut you off, but now can you give us, please, your full name, spell your last, and your address, please?
Okay, Eugene Rosinski. I live at 110 Leanne Drive.
And can you spell your last name?
Rosinski.
Thank you, sir.
Bend the
And-
microphone up to your face. There you go, up there. There you go.
This property is basically right behind my house, right behind my backyard. And I have nothing bad about dirt bikes or motorcycle and things like that. But he did state that it's not, he stated a lot that it's not a racetrack, it's not going to be that. But actually, it's training people to go to a racetrack. So if I went to a shooting range, I'm not shooting competition, I'm learning how to shoot. And then I go to a shooting range to compete maybe. So this is going to be basically to get you up to racing speed. You're learning. You're going to learn how to ride a bike, and then you're going to go to a dirt track to race competition. So it's basically the same thing, but it's not a racetrack. I agree. I understand it. But it's going to be like the same thing. There's going to be no difference, only except you're going to learn how to do it here, learn your moguls, learn your 50 miles an hour, 60 miles, and then go someplace competition. So it's sort of the same thing. And then they mentioned about the noise. Now, I lived there for 34 years. I get messages when they're going to do bombs and tanks training at Fort Dix. It all has to do with barometric pressure. Like on a normal day, they could be shooting over there and you won't hear anything. But they'll tell you, they'll send you a thing that say you might hear this because the clouds are low or for whatever reason, and you'll hear it. The windows will shake sometime, right? And when they take these readings, like right now, there's a lot of leaves on the trees. You come over my house and they're dirt bikes, you might not hear them. But when the leaves come down, there's nothing stopping it. It's loud. Now, I've been there for 34 years and they've been out there with dirt bikes, and one dirt bike, fine. Two dirt bikes, fine. You start putting 5, 6, 7 bikes out there, it's loud. Take a motorcycle, a Harley Davidson, whatever. You start one up, it's loud. Start 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's louder and louder and louder. And like I said, the conditions change, the weather, the sun, the clouds, everything like that. You can take it on a nice sunny day with leaves, the sound levels are low. All right. Oh, and then they mentioned about like stock mufflers and all. What kind of oversight's going to be there? How are we going to know that? You're not going to know that. How are you? These guys can come in there, they can modify their bikes. They have all kinds of stuff out there. You can go online, you can get different mufflers, anything to make your bike perform. Make it louder, make it faster. What kind of oversight? Is there going to be any oversight? I don't think so. Oh, another thing, it was brought up about the sound expert. Another thing too, he's getting paid for this to help them. But did you ever go to Wall Stadium? Wall Stadium is like a pit and it's loud. Those race cars in there are loud as hell. You go to New Egypt, you have bleachers where it's open. It's not half as loud as Wall Stadium. Just like the sand pit, there's pits. And when you're in there, it's louder. And like I think you mentioned it, when they're racing, when they're out there, come to my house. You can, and and our quality of life right now in the backyard is really nice. It's quiet. You can have friends, you can have family, and you sit back there and it's nice and quiet. When they put this thing out there, it's for financial gain. It's going to be a business. What are the hours of operation? 9 to 10, 9 to 5, whatever, 5 days, 7 days a week. Why should we have to put up with our quality of life because for their financial gain out there? And that's basically it, but like I said, the sound's a lot different depending on the weather conditions too. And how many motorcycles are gonna be out there, dirt bikes.
Yes.
So I'd like to ask you the same question that Mr. Costanzo asked the woman before you. Prior to them purchasing, what was the noise like?
What was that?
Prior to them purchasing this property, what was the noise like?
Well, since they purchased it, they haven't really done anything out there. I mean, I've heard a few motorcycles and all, but it hasn't been as bad. Probably right now, it's better than it was. Because before they bought it, there were a lot of kids back there. You know, there were kids, but not every day. They'd be out there one day and then you have 4 or 5 days, you don't hear anything. It's fine. Then you'd have 1 or 2 dirt bikes, then you wouldn't hear anything. It was good. It was in moderation. And I don't know, they didn't state the hours of operation. They didn't say how, or did they? I didn't catch it. They didn't say how many days a week. They didn't say 9 to 5 or,
Can I ask a follow-up question?
you know?
Yes.
Either Mr. Junuso,
But
I'm sorry.
gotta go. Oh, go ahead.
Can you answer the question about the hours, number one, and number two, can you tell us what has happened since you purchased? Because I got the impression before that you had.
The hours of operation days are on the statement of operation. We did propose 7 days a week. I think it's 9 to 6. It's a weather permitting sport. That does not mean we're going to be operating 7 days a week, just for your comfort of knowing that. It's clear as day that we are, myself and friends are actually riding back there 4 or 5 days a week now. And I just want to address the public that what they hear now, if you're saying it's technically less, it's what it is right now. I ride back there. I've agreed to meet the sound decibels, change my exhaust on my one machine when I'm training. And I can promise you, no one's going to be louder than me in there. Nobody. So I just want to be at peace with the neighbors. I don't want to be the new guy coming in causing problems. I wouldn't have chose to build my home there as well. I'm going to be living there. I just want you to know I'm riding there right now anyway. It's just, if this got approved today, it doesn't mean tomorrow it gets blown up and this is out of proportion. It's really no different than it is now. It's really no different than it is now. And I just would like, it's no different than it is now. And I would really just like everyone to understand that. I'm already riding there with friends. I am allowed to ride there, whether this is approved or not. Myself, I'm allowed to have some friends over. And I've been doing that because I'm allowed to.
Just one more thing, the sound person did mention something about insect noises are loud and all, but they're a lot different than hearing motors out there, you know, but like I said, our quality of life right now is really nice, and I would hate to see it go because for people looking financial gain, because to live there with this thing going on.
Thank you.
That's
Sir,
all.
if I
Thank
may,
you.
just follow through the chair. You also testified you've been for there 30 years. Have you seen an improvement since they've taken over the property of the noise levels?
No, I
back?
have.
Excuse me?
I have not, no. Have
So-
I seen the improvements you said?
Have you heard an improvement?
Well, like I said, it sounds, I don't know what they've been doing, but it sounds better now than it was. Now, but how many people have been riding back there? I don't know.
I'm just asking you if from the time they've taken over the property, has there been an improvement in the sounds?
Well, from the time they took over the property, they were building a house there. So there weren't any dirt bikes. Am I correct or?
No, I'm sorry.
All right, well, right now, it's not as bad as it used to be, but if they open this business, I don't know,
Thank you.
you know?
All right.
All right,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
sir. Who's next? Who's coming up? Nobody else wants to speak? You're gonna get sworn in.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for raising your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony, information, questions, or comments you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Can you kindly give us your full name, spell your last, and your address, please?
Gail Potebecki, P as in Paul, O-E, D as in David, U, B as in boy, I-C-K-Y. I'm at 6 Hickory Lane in New Egypt, in Hawken Point, directly across the street from
What
all
was the
this.
address again? I'm sorry.
6 Hickory Lane. So my comments are going to be based on what was said tonight. It comes down to a couple things, really, besides the noise. Who's going to enforce this? It's private property, it's a business. So how and who will enforce that? Whether it's the noise, if it's a noise issue, I suppose it would be Jackson Township Police. How are they going to judge whether it's meeting the criteria or not? If they're not certified, if they don't have the right equipment to test the sound. And wouldn't it make sense that if they come, that equipment could easily disappear? So again, how is it all going to be enforced? And who's going to do that? What mechanism does the township have?
I can answer that. I know code enforcement has a code enforcement officer who is certified in noise measurements.
When do they work? 7 days a week? 10
No.
to 6, as it's proposed?
They do not. But there will be more code enforcement officers on call 7 days a week. But I'm not sure if this officer in particular is going to be available, but there are tools that they have to measure noise.
Again, a piece of equipment could disappear very quickly. I understand that the noise is less at this point in time. I understand that you're just having friends over at this point, but having friends over riding bikes versus having a business riding bikes is completely different. It's a different amount, it's a different quantity of time, it's a different quantity of people. And that being said, it was presented tonight about the different sections. It was presented about how many will be in different sections. At the last meeting, it was said a maximum of 15. Well, according to what was presented tonight, it's a maximum now of 20. In the dark blue area, it's 5. In the gold area, it's 5. But on the trail, it could be 5 to 10. Additionally, how many staff? Is it just Mr. Janusa who's in charge of all this? Because he said there will be other people there. So in reality, all 3 areas could be running at one time, up to 20 different riders. So therein lies another issue.
And could I just respond to that comment?
Yes.
We stipulated that there'll be a maximum of 15 operating at any one time, whether it's 10 in one spot, 5 in another, or 5 in 3 different spots, there'll be no more than 15. That's the max.
And again, you know, this has been zone residential. Illegal trespassing has happened for years back there. Jackson Township has gone in there and taken people's vehicles away, or confiscated them, I should say, that's the proper term. They've gone in there and dumped dump trucks full of dirt to block entrances and exit and trying to police the area, and still people got back there. I understand that it'll be more regulated in terms of what they're going to be doing. But again, it's been zone residential. It's been zone residential because there are homes surrounding the entire area. If you allow this to change, who's to say that another property in the area isn't going to be petitioning for a variance to become commercial? And my final contribution to all this is, I'm glad that you're willing to come and be at the neighbors' houses while this dirt bike stuff is going on that you're supposedly going to see. I think you should hear it in the backyards of all the surrounding houses. And I think it should definitely be up to 15, not 1, not 2, not even 5. I think it should be up to 15. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else care to come back up?
No.
No, I can't give you a second chance.
It's your call, Mr. Chairman.
All right, come on up real quick.
Sir, just announce who you are again. You've been previously sworn.
Oh, you asked me if it's better now than it was?
Just your name.
Oh, Eugene Rosinski.
Thank you.
They're never there. That's why it's better now. Like I live right around the corner and they have a chain or a gate going to their house. It's a brand new house, looks very nice, by the way. And every time I go by, I walk the dog and all, and there's no one ever there. From what I understand, they didn't get to see the, approval move in, but that's why it's better now, because they're hardly ever there. Am I correct? Or?
I'm not living there. My house is not finished yet, but I am going back, I am going back and forth 4 to 5 days a week riding. Back and forth 30 minutes to Wall Township, where I live. So the riding is going on currently, the living is not. And which would be no difference in the noise, in my opinion.
Okay, well, anyway, that's all I wanted to say, that there's hardly anybody ever there.
Thank you. Anybody in the audience?
Thank you for letting me.
Anybody come on up? That's it. You got 5 minutes.
Sir, thank you for raising your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm testimony, information, questions, or comments you're about to present before the board will represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You kindly give us your full name, spell your last, and your address, please.
Jeffrey Podebecki, P as in Paul, OE, D as in David, U, B as in boy, ICKY, 6 Hickory Lane, New Egypt. My wife was just up here, but I just wanted to reiterate something about the zone commercial or zone residential and then becoming commercial. At the last meeting, we were here and there was a gentleman that testified at the very end. And apparently he owns property directly adjacent to the applicant's property. And there's several acres there. And he testified that he doesn't hear any noise at all, which obviously is not the truth. And my concern
Can we
is,
limit our discussion to what happened tonight? I don't know what we're talking about 2 meetings ago.
okay, well, my concern is if this property is deemed commercial, then people who own property around it are also going to apply to have their residential property deemed commercial. And then potentially we can have other businesses in the area, whether it's warehouses or strip malls or whatever the business might be.
So, and I'm respectfully cutting you off. So variances, generally speaking, run with the land and are require site-specific, D1 variances at least, generally require, broadly speaking, site-specific testimony to meet their burden of proof. So the idea that just because one use is granted a D1 variance would lead to others is not necessarily the case.
Okay, well, that was my concern, so I'm glad you clarified that.
Anything else that you want to add?
No, sir.
Beautiful. Thank you for coming. All right, not seeing anybody come forward, I'm going to close the public session. Okay, close.
So, Mr. Chair, we need a date certain so my client can,
Is that good for you?
November, excuse me, pardon me. So, no, can you, given what you perceive your expert wants to do, can he complete his testimony and is he available for the November 3rd meeting?
We have a very large agenda.
that's enough time. We just have to make sure that Norm's available. Ian's always available. You're not available? You're not available November 3rd. What's the meeting after that? We need a planner.
17?
We decided not to adjourn.
We have 3 people on that, 2 people.
Well, so I'm dancing around. What's the December meeting? You know, is Mr. Borden, are you available the 17th?
17th. Our sound expert's available November 3rd. Let's stick with November 3rd. We'll cross the planning bridge if we get to that.
Well, so I respectfully sort of, again, this is board management. So, I heard your own applicant complaining about the number of times he has to come back.
No, we would get a planner here. Right, Graham or somebody.
All
That's what I'm
right,
just saying.
so,
We'll
all right,
cross
I didn't want
I
to have
missed-
to, we want to try to wrap it up.
only one time. I agree.
Okay, so November 3rd. So, ladies and gentlemen, this application, which is number, excuse me, number 4 on this particular agenda, use variance 3355 will be carried to the November 3rd, 2021 meeting without the requirement of further notice. The applicant has waived time. Mr. Alfieri, before you leave, I think you also heard requests. I think what's going to happen, so there's no respectfully, so there's no issues. I know that the applicant likes and wants to be available. I think by Friday, if you can get dates, a Saturday, it was a Saturday usually. Yes, so you'll get us the 2 Saturdays and the times you're available by Friday to Mr. Proporo's office. He's going to forward those dates. I'm going to ask the board members on the record to choose one of those 2 Saturdays between when they come in, and either please try to make arrangements to get out there or not.
You just can't have a quorum.
That's right. No. So, okay, so let me go further. So one of the purposes of that site visit is to ensure that there are, I perceive that there be 15 vehicles available, so that in theory, I'm going to be very layperson to set this up. You flip the switch of all 15. If a board member wants to walk across the street and have a perception of what it listens to, that board member wants to hear that. And then you can determine, to Mr. Hurley's point respectfully, if the layman's perception of what it sounds like is sufficient enough to have any evidential perception of what it means. But the board has, they have the right to do that. They can stand across the street. You might as well stand across the street with sort of that test. I think also listening to Mr. Hurley and doing a little bit of the quick research, while I am somewhat comfortable at the distinguishing the line of cases from DeFelice and the Point Beach case, which I can't remember the name off the top of my head. I think that we should Mr. Alfieri should, since that's it appears to be a major condition that you've agreed to and it's been a concern of enforcement, we kind of lay out where it's distinguished, so that it's not just your applicant accepting it, that it runs with the land and is enforceable.
Understood. Right, and yes, the board's granted an extension. Mr. Janusa will get in touch with either Jeff or whomever to give you 2 Saturdays at time range, and then just somebody has to coordinate so there's not more than 4 people there, not more than 4.
No, there has to be only 3.
Yeah, that's true. It's quorum. You're right. I'm thinking D. You're right. 3 at a time. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
All right, motion to adjourn.
So, yeah, so you don't push it.